Hello everyone and welcome. For thousands of years, one of the world's most enduring civilizations has thrived, its very identity forged in the heart of East Asia. Our story begins not with kings or dynasties, but with the land itself, the fertile basins of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. These two great arteries didn't just nourish ancient settlements. They carved the very foundation of a culture defined by its remarkable and persistent continuity. From the dawn of agricultural life to the rise of powerful, centralized empires, this history is a story of profound transformation. But it's also the story of a civilization shaped and protected by its unique geography. Vast deserts to the north and west, towering mountain ranges including the Himalayas, and the endless Pacific Ocean to the east, both isolated and safeguarded these early societies. This natural isolation allowed a unique cultural identity and political system to flourish, one that would evolve largely independent of outside influences. It fostered distinct philosophies and systems of governance that, despite periods of fragmentation and upheaval, established patterns that would echo through history for millennia to come. Join us as we journey through the formative epochs of this civilization. We'll explore how early settlements gave rise to sophisticated societies, how legendary rulers laid the groundwork for imperial ideals, and how the collapse of one dynasty led to the birth of another, forging a powerful, enduring synthesis of ideas and power. We'll see how a single, powerful state, the Qing, drew from centuries of brutal competition to achieve a monumental unification, one that, while brief, would forever change the course of history and set the stage for the Han Dynasty, a golden age that cemented the political, intellectual, and cultural foundations that define this civilization even today. One of the world's most enduring cultures stretches back over 3,000 years. It all started in the fertile basins of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, two major waterways that shaped the land into what would eventually become a unified state. These rivers provided a solid foundation for a rich cultural history. The Yellow River, often called the Sorrow due to its devastating floods, ironically nurtured ancient settlements in its nutrient-rich valleys. Meanwhile, the Yangtze flowed through central regions, creating a complementary agricultural zone that would unite with the northern territories, forming a cohesive cultural identity. The geography of this land features natural boundaries that both protected and isolated early societies. Vast deserts to the north and west, towering mountain ranges like the Himalayas, and the Pacific Ocean to the east created a unique environment. This isolation allowed indigenous development to flourish, largely free from outside influences for long periods. It helped foster a distinct cultural identity and political systems that evolved through several pivotal historical epochs. From the earliest agricultural settlements to the sophistication of imperial dynasties, this history shows incredible continuity. Even through times of fragmentation and upheaval, the shifts from tribal confederations to centralized empires set patterns of governance, philosophy, and social organization that would influence East Asia and beyond for centuries. Geography played a huge role in shaping these early settlements. The Yellow Valley, with its lowest soil-fine wind-blown sediment, was exceptionally fertile for agriculture and served as the cradle for early development. This waterway system, starting in the Tibetan Plateau and flowing east across the northern plains, created a natural corridor for human migration and settlement. The periodic flooding deposited nutrient-rich silt across the North Plain, creating perfect conditions for early agriculture, while also posing real threats to communities living along its banks. The landscape around these fertile areas established both protective barriers and developmental challenges. The northern regions were bordered by the vast Gobi Desert and Mongolian grasslands, which shielded agricultural communities from nomadic incursions, but also allowed for cultural exchange when contact occurred. The western territories featured mountainous terrain that created natural compartments where distinct local traditions evolved before gradually blending into broader cultural patterns. The eastern coastlines offered access to maritime resources and eventual contact with the Korean and Japanese archipelagos, though seafaring developed relatively late compared to river transport. The southern frontiers, with their subtropical forests and mountain ranges, supported different agricultural patterns and cultural practices than the northern heartlands, adding valuable diversity to the emerging cultural mix. This geographic diversity encouraged regional variations in development. The northern plains focused on drought-resistant millet cultivation, animal husbandry, and building defensive military organizations against steppe peoples. Central regions along the lower Yellow River developed intensive agriculture, supporting dense populations and early urban centers. Meanwhile, southern territories advanced wet rice cultivation techniques that required sophisticated irrigation systems, yielding higher outputs per acre than northern grain crops. These regional specialties created complementary economic zones that would eventually integrate through political unification and infrastructure development. Natural resources spread throughout these areas provided essential materials for technological progress. Accessible clay deposits led to advanced pottery traditions, evolving from simple storage vessels to ritual objects and artistic expressions. Forest resources supplied building materials, fuel, and raw materials for tools. Rivers offered transportation routes, irrigation sources, and aquatic food resources, supplementing land-based agriculture. The availability of these resources, concentrated in easily accessible areas, enabled the technological advancements necessary for complex social organization. The northeastern plains were particularly rich in mineral deposits like copper and tin, which were key for bronze metallurgy, transforming military capabilities and ritual practices in early state formation. Southern regions produced unique resources, including lacquer, silk, and various medicinal plants that became valuable trade items. The western mountains provided jade, treasured for its spiritual associations and beauty. These resource distributions encouraged interregional trade networks that fostered cultural exchange alongside economic interaction. Geographic isolation was perhaps the most significant factor shaping developmental patterns. Natural barriers, oceans, deserts, mountains limited external contact without completely shutting it down. Unlike Mesopotamia or the Mediterranean basin, which experienced constant interaction among multiple civilizational centers, the Yellow and Yangtze basins developed with relatively little outside influence. This partial isolation allowed indigenous institutions, philosophical systems, writing methods, and cultural practices to evolve with remarkable continuity over thousands of years. When outside influences did break through these natural barriers, like Buddhism from India or military technologies from Central Asia, they were transformed and adapted rather than replacing native traditions. This pattern of selective adaptation within continuous cultural development would define historical progression through the ages, with foreign elements woven into existing frameworks rather than displacing them. The archaeological record of human settlements goes back about 100,000 years. Paleolithic sites show us stone tools, signs of controlled fire use, and early artistic expressions, like carved bone fragments. Over time, technology evolved during the Paleolithic era, setting the stage for a big leap forward during the Neolithic Revolution, when settled agriculture changed how humans organized their societies around 10,000 years ago. This huge shift from a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle to settled farming communities really changed social structures, technology, and cultural possibilities. Archaeological finds from various sites across the major valley systems highlight this transformation, showcasing changes in where people lived, how they made tools, the styles of pottery they used, and their burial customs. This process unfolded slowly over many years, with different regions picking up agricultural practices at their own pace based on local conditions. In the northern areas, millet domestication began around 10,000 years ago. Cultures like Sichuan and Peking, dating back to the 8th millennium, show clear signs of millet farming, permanent homes, storage spaces, and specialized tools for agriculture. Millet turned out to be the perfect staple crop for the semi-arid northern conditions, needing little water while still providing reliable harvests in less than ideal soil. This adaptability allowed farming communities to flourish in places where other crops might have struggled, laying the groundwork for future cultural development. Meanwhile, the southern regions took a different path, focusing on rice cultivation. By at least the 7th millennium, communities along the Yangtze had a solid grasp of rice farming, as seen at sites like Hemyu-do in Zhejiang province. These early rice-growing societies came up with unique technologies, including specialized bone tools for harvesting, wooden implements for preparing fields, and advanced water management systems crucial for paddy farming. Although rice farming required more labor and complex irrigation than millet, it produced significantly more nutrition per acre, supporting larger populations than northern grain farming. This agricultural split between the north and south, millet in the north and rice in the south, set up lasting regional characteristics that would stick around throughout history. The different needs and outputs of these staple crops influenced everything from population density to social organization, labor systems to cultural practices. Still, both agricultural systems created the crucial surplus needed for social stratification, specialized labor, and eventually state formation. Switching to agricultural settlements sparked major social changes. Permanent villages replaced seasonal camps, as reliable food supplies allowed people to stay in one place year-round. Early Neolithic settlements, like Banpo, near modern Xi'an, show the growing complexity of these farming communities. Archaeological digs reveal specialized activity areas, defensive structures, communal buildings, and distinct living zones indicating social organization beyond just family groups. Surrounded by protective ditches with specialized workshops and communal burial grounds, these settlements showed early signs of social stratification and collective organization. As agricultural production ramped up with better techniques and tools, specialized labor became more common. People didn't have to spend all their time on food production anymore. Some community members could focus on developing skills in crafting, religious rituals, administrative tasks, and even military roles. This division of labor, which wasn't possible in hunter-gatherer societies where everyone was involved in food acquisition, laid the groundwork for more complex social hierarchies and cultural advancements. Material culture saw rapid evolution during this time. Pottery moved from simple utilitarian vessels to more intricate forms with distinct regional styles. The Yangshao culture thriving in the middle Yellow River Valley for about 2 millennia from the early 5th millennium, produced signature painted pottery with geometric designs and stylized animal motifs. These vessels, requiring significant technical skill and artistic flair, reflected both regional identity and increasing social complexity, with different types serving specific ritual and practical purposes. Later, the Longshan culture emerged around the start of the 3rd millennium and lasted nearly 1,000 years, developing incredibly thin and technically sophisticated black pottery made on early pottery wheels. Some of these vessels had walls just a millimeter thick, showcasing impressive technical skill in specialized production beyond home crafting. This period also saw the extensive use of jade for ceremonial objects, signaling growing social stratification and ritual complexity. Archaeological finds from Longshan sites reveal large settlements with stamped earth fortifications, significant public buildings, and differences in burial practices based on social status. Population growth surged following the intensification of agriculture. By the late Neolithic period, sizable settlements housed thousands of people along major waterways. Lingzhou culture sites near modern Shanghai featured urban centers spanning hundreds of acres, protected by advanced water control systems that served both defensive and agricultural needs. This concentration of people created the demographic foundation necessary for state formation and more complex social hierarchies. The agricultural surplus generated by these farming communities ultimately led to the rise of ruling elites who claimed excess production through taxation or tribute, setting the economic stage for early states. Cultural self-understanding kicks off with some legendary figures known as the 5 Emperors, whose tales mix myth with early history. Later texts paint these cultural heroes, Huang Di, the Yellow Emperor, Zhuangshu, Emperor Ku, Emperor Yao, and Emperor Shun, as moral role models, who laid down the groundwork for society through their virtuous leadership and clever innovations. While we can't dig up archaeological proof of these specific guys, the legends show us how later generations thought about their origins and political ideals. These stories link various technological and cultural advancements to these legendary rulers. For instance, the Yellow Emperor is said to have invented writing, the compass, math, wheeled vehicles, and even silk production. Emperor Yao is credited with creating the first calendar by observing the stars, while Emperor Shun developed early music systems tied to rituals and set up administrative divisions. Even though these tales reflect later ideals rather than historical facts, they highlight how cultural memory shaped views on progress through great leadership instead of just impersonal historical events. More than just the inventions, the political principles in these foundational myths are pretty significant. The legendary emperors supposedly chose their successors based on merit instead of family ties. Yao picked Shun, and Shun chose Yu, all based on their proven virtues and administrative skills. This merit-based idea, even if it often got ignored in real life, remained a powerful ideal throughout history. The belief that real authority comes from moral integrity rather than just military might or birthright had a lasting impact on political philosophy for centuries. The reign of Emperor Yao marks a shift in the legendary tales toward accounts that seem more historically plausible. According to traditional records, Yao faced catastrophic floods that threatened farming communities in the Central Plains. Some scholars have even tried to link this environmental crisis to major flooding events around 2000 BC, setting the stage for the heroic Yu, who became a key figure in these legends. Yu the Great was tasked with controlling the destructive floodwaters, and supposedly spent 13 years tackling this monumental challenge. Unlike his predecessors, who tried to block the floods with dams, Yu took a different route by dredging channels, clearing riverways, and setting up water management systems that guided the floodwaters instead of just trying to stop them. This approach, which worked with nature rather than against it, became a symbol of smart governance in future political thought. Yu's flood control achievement is seen as a major civilization-building act, transforming destructive natural forces into productive resources through human ingenuity, organization, and perseverance. His success led to him being chosen as Shun's successor, laying the groundwork for future political development. Traditional historians view Yu as the founder of the first hereditary ruling house, the Xia, marking the shift from legendary sage kings to dynastic rule. We can't definitively confirm the existence of Yu or the Xia era, as described in later texts through archaeological evidence. However, settlements from around that time, early 2nd millennium BC, show signs of increasing social complexity, technological advancements, and political centralization. The Erlitou culture, thriving around 1900 to 1500 BC in the Central Plains, displays traits consistent with early state formation, monumental architecture, bronze metallurgy, specialized craft production, and clear social stratification in living arrangements and burial practices. The legendary tales surrounding Yu and his successors established foundational concepts in political thought that would influence future generations. The idea of a ruler as a moral example, rather than just a powerful force, became central to political legitimacy. The connection between natural harmony and good governance created a lasting framework for understanding political authority as aligned with cosmic forces rather than opposing them. The principle of choosing leaders based on virtue and ability instead of birthright established a meritocratic ideal that would challenge hereditary privilege throughout political history. These core ideas, moral governance, harmony between humans and nature, and merit-based ideals emerged during the early days of settlement and state development. They continued to shape political philosophy throughout the imperial era and beyond, showing remarkable consistency despite major changes in governance structures. This tension between enduring ideals and shifting practical realities would define political development across centuries of historical evolution. Early cultural development also laid the groundwork for patterns of thought that would greatly influence intellectual history. The concept of correlative thinking, which involves understanding things through their relationships rather than absolute categories, emerged during this formative period. Natural cycles, social relationships, and political structures were seen as interconnected rather than separate. This way of thinking, which is quite different from Western analytical traditions that create sharp distinctions between categories, would shape philosophical, scientific, and political thought throughout history. By around 2000 BC, the foundations for cultural development were firmly in place. Agricultural systems capable of producing reliable surpluses supported growing populations. Social stratification created specialized roles beyond just food production. Technological innovations like pottery, textiles, and early metallurgy showcased increasing sophistication. Settlements expanded in size and complexity, with some displaying traits of early urban development. Regional differences added diversity, while still sharing enough common ground for eventual cultural integration. These fundamental patterns, established during the early period, would evolve through subsequent historical developments while maintaining a remarkable continuity in basic cultural orientation and social organization. The Xia era represents a crucial transition from legendary prehistory to historically documented state formation, spanning roughly from 2070 to 1600 BC. According to traditional accounts, Yu the Great founded this first hereditary ruling line after successfully managing the catastrophic floods that devastated agricultural communities. This pivotal shift from merit-based succession to hereditary rule set the stage for the dynastic political pattern that would dominate governance for centuries. Traditional historians often portray Yu's decision to pass power to his son Qi, instead of the most capable minister, as a significant break from earlier practices. This transition reportedly faced pushback, with historical texts suggesting that Yi, a capable minister, initially challenged Qi's succession before ultimately being defeated. This ongoing struggle between hereditary privilege and merit-based selection would pop up repeatedly throughout history, creating a tug-of-war between competing principles of legitimacy that later philosophical traditions would seek to reconcile. While the texts about the Xia come from much later periods and contain clearly legendary elements, archaeological evidence from the early 2nd millennium BC shows societal developments that align with early state formation. The Erlitou culture, thriving along the middle Yellow River Valley from about 1900 to 1500 BC, displayed traits many scholars associate with the semi-legendary Xia. The Erlitou site reveals a substantial urban center near modern Luoyang, featuring palace complexes, craft workshops, and elite burials filled with prestigious goods that ordinary folks didn't have access to. The site shows advanced urban planning that surpasses earlier Neolithic settlements. A large palatial complex covering around 12,000 square meters featured rammed earth foundations, timber structures, and specialized areas for different administrative tasks. Surrounding residential areas show differences in status based on building size, construction quality, and material possessions. These archaeological findings suggest a stratified society with centralized authority, capable of mobilizing significant labor forces for monumental projects. Bronze technology emerged during this time, providing practical advantages and prestigious symbols that reinforced social hierarchy. Early bronze production involved complex processes like ore mining, charcoal preparation, furnace construction, and sophisticated casting techniques. These operations required specialized knowledge, substantial resources, and coordinated labor beyond what households could manage. The concentration of bronze objects in elite contexts suggests that ruling groups controlled access to this valuable material, boosting their social status through exclusive possession of ritually significant vessels and superior weapons. Erlitou bronzes, though less sophisticated than later examples, showcase impressive technical achievement for early metallurgy. Ritual vessels, like Ju and Jia forms used in elite ceremonies, appear in high-status burials and palatial contexts. Bronze weapons, while still relatively rare compared to later periods, provided tangible military advantages through superior durability and effectiveness compared to stone or jade tools. The control over bronze production and distribution likely strengthened the authority of rulers over subordinate populations and rival polities. Agricultural advancements supported these developments in political and social complexity. Archaeological evidence indicates expanded irrigation systems, increased use of animals for field preparation, and more efficient farming techniques during this period. These agricultural improvements generated surplus production necessary for supporting specialized craft workers administrative staff, and ruling elites who didn't directly participate in food production. Population growth followed these productivity boosts, creating larger labor pools for construction projects and military campaigns. The political organization of early Xia, pieced together from archaeological evidence and later texts, likely consisted of a core territory under direct royal control, surrounded by affiliated regions that acknowledged ritual supremacy without necessarily submitting to direct administrative oversight. This pattern, a directly governed center with decreasing authority toward peripheral regions, would characterize political formations for centuries to come. Regional variations in material culture during this time suggest considerable local autonomy within a shared cultural framework rather than uniform administration across vast territories. Traditional accounts depict the Xia as eventually succumbing to internal corruption. The dynasty's last ruler, Ji, appears in historical texts as a classic tyrant whose moral failings led to the loss of heavenly favor. According to the records of the Grand Historian, compiled during the Han era, nearly 2 millennia later, Ji indulged in extravagant luxury, brutally punished critics, neglected administrative duties, and ignored agricultural development crucial for his subjects' welfare. Whether this narrative is historically accurate or serves as a moral lesson, it established a lasting pattern in historical writing. Ruling houses often start with virtuous founders, but eventually fall into corruption, justifying their replacement by more deserving successors. This narrative framework provided ideological continuity across political upheavals, allowing historical understanding to accommodate dynastic changes without undermining the fundamental legitimacy of monarchical rule itself. The pattern of virtuous beginnings, gradual corruption, and justified replacement would reappear throughout later historiography, offering a moral lens for understanding political change that went beyond mere power shifts. This interpretation allowed cultural continuity despite political disruptions, which is a key element in the impressive durability of traditional cultural patterns across frequent regime changes. The Shang era kicked off around 1600 BC when they took over the Xia realm, and boy, did they make their mark. They set up a well-documented state that started in Jiangsu and later moved to Anyang, which is in today's Henan province. Unlike the Xia, which is more of a legend, we've got tons of archaeological finds and written records that prove the Shang were definitely real. This period was huge for all sorts of advancements: politics, religion, military tech, and most importantly, writing. This writing thing was a game changer for culture. Under Shang rule, their territory grew way beyond the Xia's old stomping grounds, thanks to military campaigns and smart political alliances. They had a grip on much of the North China Plain and even reached parts of the central Yangtze region. But don't get it twisted. This wasn't an empire like we think of today. They had core areas they controlled directly, surrounded by allies and regions that recognized Shang supremacy without being fully governed by them. The king kept this whole network running through personal ties with local lords, some military muscle when needed, and a big dose of religious authority, thanks to their unique access to ancestral power and divine messages. Excavations at major Shang sites show they were pretty advanced in urban planning. The early capitals at Zhengzhou and Yanxi had massive rammed earth walls enclosing big urban spaces with areas for crafts, elite living, and rituals. The last capital, Yingsu near Anyang, covered over 30 square kilometers and had specialized districts for all sorts of activities. You'd find royal palaces, elite homes, workshops crafting bronze, jade, and bone items, plus huge cemeteries. This all points to a society with complex social structures and impressive administrative skills. They had the manpower to pull off big construction projects and keep skilled artisans busy making luxury goods. The foundations for their major buildings required thousands of workers coordinated through some serious management systems. Elite tombs were filled with lavish goods like bronze vessels, jade ornaments, pottery, and even sacrificial victims, showing just how stratified their society was. Craft workshops showed they had full-time specialists and standardized production techniques, hinting at centralized management instead of just home-based crafting. Shang culture was incredibly sophisticated, especially in bronze work. The ritual bronze vessels from this time were technically advanced and artistically refined compared to other ancient cultures. These pieces, made using complex casting techniques, featured intricate designs like animal masks and geometric patterns. The biggest ones, like the square dinged vessels with 4 legs, required a lot of teamwork and resources, including copper, tin, and loads of charcoal for smelting. These bronze vessels weren't just for show. They played a key role in ancestral worship, which was central to Shang religion. Different vessel types were used in elaborate sacrificial rituals. Guo and Zhu for pouring wine, Ding for cooking sacrificial meat, and Gui for grain offerings. Only the elite had these prestigious items, which showed off their status and helped them perform the rituals necessary to keep the cosmic order and ancestral favor intact. This blend of political power, religious duty, and material display was what defined elite culture during the Shang period. The biggest game changer of the Shang era was the rise of writing, which transformed how culture and politics were communicated. Oracle bone inscriptions, divination records carved onto animal bones and turtle shells, are the earliest substantial writing we have, mostly from the late Shang period between about 1250 and 1046 B.C. We found over 150,000 fragments that document royal divinations about harvests, military moves, royal births, and other important state matters. The writing system was already pretty sophisticated, with around 4,500 unique characters, suggesting a lot of development happened before this that just didn't make it into the archaeological record. These oracle bone inscriptions show just how advanced Shang administrative and religious practices were. Professional diviners would prepare the bones or shells by drilling depressions, then apply heated bronze rods to create crack patterns. The king would interpret these cracks as answers to questions posed to ancestral spirits or the high god Di. Scribes recorded everything, the questions, the interpretations, and the outcomes right on the bones, creating a record of divine communication. This blend of religious ritual, political decision-making, and record-keeping was the backbone of Shang governance. At the center of Shang governance was the king, who was the main link between the earthly and spiritual worlds. His authority came not just from military might or control, but from his unique ability to communicate with royal ancestors, who still had a say in human affairs after death. This religious foundation for political power meant Shang kings had dual responsibilities: managing their earthly domains effectively and performing the right rituals for their ancestors to ensure good harvests, military wins, and the continuation of their dynasty. The king's key ritual job was conducting divination ceremonies to connect with royal ancestors using oracle bones. These rituals tackled state matters like military campaigns, farming forecasts, royal births and deaths, hunting trips, and when to hold sacrifices. The questions asked give us a peek into what was important for Shang governance. Will it rain? Should we attack the Gongfang? Will the king's toothache go away? Will this year's harvest be good? These records give us a rare look at the royal priorities and concerns without the filter of later historical retellings. Shang religion was complex, with a hierarchy of deities and ancestors. At the top was Di, a supreme god controlling nature and human affairs, who possibly evolved from an ancestral figure into a more abstract deity. Below Di were royal ancestors who still had influence over the dynasty's fortunes and required regular sacrifices to keep them happy. Other natural forces, like mountain spirits and river powers, were lower in this hierarchy. Regular sacrifices to these supernatural beings were a key royal duty, helping to maintain cosmic balance through proper rituals. Archaeological finds from royal tombs show elaborate burial practices, including significant human sacrifices. Royal graves at Zibeigang near Anyang had hundreds of sacrificial victims, including retainers, servants, war captives, and sometimes even royal family members, all meant to serve the king in the afterlife. These practices highlight the immense power of Shang kings and the belief in an afterlife that mirrored earthly politics. The massive investment in royal burials, involving huge labor and valuable goods, reinforced the king's prestige and ensured a smooth transition of royal authority to the spirit world. Shang society was pretty stratified. At the top was the king and his royal family, holding both political and religious power. Below them were aristocratic families connected to the royal house through marriage or lesser branches. Military leaders commanded forces and were rewarded for victories. Skilled craftsmen created luxury goods and passed on their knowledge through apprenticeships. Most people were peasant farmers, making up the bulk of the population and producing the agricultural surplus that supported the elite. At the bottom were slaves, often captured in wars or forced into servitude, doing the grunt work and sometimes joining their masters in sacrificial rites. The economy was mainly agricultural, focusing on millet in the north and some rice in the south. Farming communities used bronze tools for certain tasks, but stone and wood tools were still common. Domestic animals like pigs, dogs, sheep, and cattle added extra protein to their diets. Hunting was also a big deal for the royals, providing more meat and showing off their martial skills. This agricultural system produced enough surplus to support a large non-farming population engaged in crafts, administration, and military service. The Shang military was pretty sophisticated for its time. Records and archaeological finds show organized forces, capable of launching expeditions against neighboring groups identified as Fang, non-Shang populations that posed threats or opportunities for expansion. They had bronze weapons like dagger axes, spearheads, and helmets that gave them an edge over less developed foes. They also used reinforced compound bows for effective ranged attacks. Chariot technology, likely borrowed from steppe regions to the north and west during the late Shang, changed the game by boosting mobility and impact in battle. These chariots, pulled by horses and carrying archer warriors, needed a lot of resources to build and maintain. They required skilled woodworkers for the wheels and frames, plus breeding and training programs for the horses. Effective use of chariots meant having trained drivers and warriors working together, so they were mainly used by an elite group rather than the whole army, but their impact on the battlefield was huge. Infantry armed with bronze weapons made up the bulk of Shang forces, with specialized units handling different roles in combat. Military campaigns had multiple purposes beyond just expanding territory. Successful missions secured resources not found in core areas, like specific woods or minerals from peripheral regions. They also demonstrated royal power and created buffer zones to protect agricultural heartlands. Captives from these campaigns provided sacrificial victims for religious ceremonies and labor for construction projects. The military success showcased by these campaigns boosted the king's prestige among both his subjects and neighboring states, discouraging challenges to Shang authority. The Shang's decline centered on the reign of its last king, known as Zhou or King Zhou in traditional tales. Later historical accounts paint him as a classic tyrant, whose moral decay echoed that of the legendary Qi of Shuo. These stories say King Zhou lived in excess, building extravagant palaces, hoarding harems, and meting out cruel punishments to opponents, while neglecting the rituals necessary to keep divine favor. While these narratives might be exaggerated, archaeological evidence does hint at increasing social inequality and elite consumption during the late Shang, suggesting some serious stress before the political collapse. As Shang authority weakened under poor leadership, the Zhou clan rose to prominence on the western edge. They were originally a semi-nomadic group from the Wei River Valley, who absorbed a lot of cultural influences from the central areas. The Zhao acted as a buffer state between Shang territories and Western peoples. Under King Wen, they gradually expanded their territory and influence while still claiming allegiance to the Shang king. After King Wen died, his son, the shift from the Shang to the Zhou was a big deal politically, but it also kept a lot of cultural traditions alive. The Zhou didn't just toss out Shang practices. They took what worked and made it their own. They kept the Shang's rituals, bronze vessel styles, divination methods, and administrative techniques, while also bringing in fresh ideas that fit their needs. This mix of big political changes alongside steady cultural development would be a theme for many dynasties that followed. Each new ruling house would say they were restoring the proper way after the last one messed up, but they always built on what was already there instead of starting from scratch. The archaeological evidence shows that this transition wasn't just a clean break. For instance, the bronze vessels from the Western Zhao still had those classic Shang designs, but they also started to show new styles and ways of writing. Burial customs changed a bit, but the core beliefs about ancestors and social status remained intact. Even how people settled and built their homes saw gradual changes instead of complete overhauls. And here's the kicker. The writing system that started with the Shang didn't disappear. It evolved and expanded, allowing for the sharing of texts even through all the political upheaval. This was a key factor in keeping cultural continuity alive, even when politics got messy. When the Zhou took down the Shang around 1046 BC, they kicked off a new political era that would last, at least on paper, for nearly 8 centuries, even with some major changes in how things were run. King Wu, who led the charge at Mai, didn't just claim victory in battle. He also laid claim to moral authority with this groundbreaking idea called the Mandate of Heaven. According to this concept, which you can find in early texts like the Book of Documents, the heavens had pulled their support from the corrupt Shang rulers and handed it over to the virtuous Zhou. The Duke of Zhou famously summed it up. Heaven sees as my people see. Heaven hears as my people hear. This Mandate of Heaven was a clever political tool that served several purposes. It justified the Zhou takeover, even though they were once just a frontier state with no real claims to power. It also set up a moral code for leadership that went beyond just military might, tying legitimacy to ethical behavior instead. Plus, it provided a way to think about political succession that could handle changes without losing sight of core values. Basically, ruling wasn't guaranteed by birthright or just because you were a strong warrior. Heaven would grant authority based on virtue and take it away if leaders became corrupt or ignored the needs of the people. This idea was super flexible and would adapt throughout history, linking established power with divine approval while also giving people a reason to rebel against bad rulers. It wove together legitimacy, ethical governance, and harmony into a worldview that made sense of historical shifts within a moral framework. Philosophers later, especially Confucians, would take this basic idea and turn it into complex theories about governance that shaped thought for centuries. Right after his victory, King Wu set up the Fengxian system of enfeoffment, giving out land to family and allies to help control the Shang territories. This method of land distribution created a decentralized system of governance, similar to European feudalism, but with its own unique twist. Family members got big chunks of land, especially the closest relatives, while loyal supporters received smaller portions based on their contributions. Even some members of the former Shang elite were given land in return for recognizing Zhou authority. This enfeoffment process created a network of subordinate lords who pledged loyalty to the Zhou king. These regional rulers were given territories, along with military duties to the sovereign, forming a hierarchy of political relationships strengthened by rituals, marriage alliances, and regular court attendance. The whole system was designed to tackle a major challenge for the Zhou conquerors: how to manage a vast area with limited administrative resources. By handing over local governance to trusted subordinates tied by family and loyalty, the early Zhou monarchs extended their control far beyond what their military could reach. Not long after the Zhou conquest, a crisis hit when King Wu died unexpectedly around 1043 BC, leaving a young son as his heir. This succession crisis put the newly formed political order at risk before it could even settle in. The Duke of Zhou, King Wu's younger brother, stepped in as regent to protect the throne for his nephew, King Qing. But this move sparked rebellion from other royal brothers who had carved out their own territories through the enfeoffment system. These unhappy princes teamed up with remnants of Shang resistance in the east, forming a strong coalition against the central authority. The Duke of Zhou acted swiftly, rallying loyal forces to crush the rebellion in a 3-year military campaign. His victory not only saved the fledgling dynastic order, but also set important precedents for royal authority. During his roughly 7-year regency, the Duke laid down many institutional foundations of Zhou governance that would stick around for centuries. He shared key political ideas through pronouncements preserved in texts like the Book of Documents, helping shape the understanding of legitimate authority. Most impressively, when King Qing came of age, the Duke voluntarily handed over power to him, showing political restraint that made him a standout figure in later political traditions. The administration during the early Western Zhou operated through a system that later scholars called Fengxian, a network of fiefs ruled by relatives and allies who recognized the royal house's ritual supremacy. This setup created zones of decreasing royal control that spread out from the capital. The royal domain, initially centered in the Wei River Valley with its capital at Heiyojing near modern Xi'an, remained under direct royal administration. Surrounding areas were governed by close relatives and trusted allies who had considerable autonomy, but still had to meet their ritual, military, and economic obligations to the king. These territorial lords, known as juhu, set up smaller courts that mirrored royal structures. They managed local affairs, maintained military forces ready for royal campaigns, collected taxes from farmers, and performed rituals that acknowledged Zhou authority. Regular visits to the royal court, participation in royal hunting trips, and contributions to royal building projects helped strengthen personal ties between the king and subordinate rulers. This system leaned more on personal relationships than on bureaucratic structures, making governance flexible enough to handle regional diversity while keeping political unity. Archaeological finds show the gradual rise in administrative complexity within both royal domains and major regional states. Bronze inscriptions that record official appointments, land grants, and judicial decisions reveal increasingly specialized governance functions. Early Western Zhou administrative roles were mostly handed out based on birth status, with aristocratic families holding the high offices. However, even within this hereditary system, specialized roles began to emerge for ritual performance, military command, agricultural management, and judicial proceedings. These specialized functions laid the groundwork for bureaucratic systems that would develop more fully in later periods. Ritual was crucial for maintaining this decentralized political order. Elaborate ceremonies featuring bronze vessels, carefully choreographed movements, and musical performances reinforced social hierarchies and political relationships by embodying cosmic principles. The king's ritual role as a go-between with heaven took priority over direct administrative tasks, creating a situation where symbolic authority often outweighed practical power. State ceremonies marking seasonal changes, military campaigns, ancestor commemorations, and interstate relationships helped create shared cultural frameworks that went beyond local differences. Specially crafted bronze vessels commemorating significant events were especially important in this ritual system. These items, which required significant resources and expert craftsmanship, recorded royal gifts, military victories, land grants, and administrative appointments. The inscriptions on these vessels, sometimes stretching to hundreds of characters, offer invaluable insights into early Zhou political history. Beyond their written content, the vessels themselves served as tangible symbols of political legitimacy, with specific forms, decorative styles, and inscription formats reserved for different levels of status within the aristocratic hierarchy. The Western Zhou political system enjoyed an impressive run of stability for about 2 centuries after it kicked off. A bunch of factors played into this success. For starters, the mandate of heaven provided a strong reason for Zhou rule that went beyond just military might. Then there were the family ties between the royal house and local lords, which built personal loyalties and made political duties feel more like a family affair. Plus, shared rituals helped create a sense of unity across all those diverse regions. And let's not forget the decentralized structure, which allowed local areas to adapt while still keeping in touch with the central authority. During the early Western Zhou, agriculture really took off. The arrival of better iron tools, though they were still pretty rare compared to bronze, made farming way more efficient. These tools allowed for deeper plowing and better land clearing. Plus, irrigation projects opened up previously tough-to-farm areas. New crop varieties that suited different soils and climates spread thanks to migration and trade. All this agricultural progress led to a population boom with settlements popping up all over the Yellow River Basin and gradually moving into areas that were once pretty empty. These changes in agriculture didn't just affect farming. They sparked a social transformation too. With more people around, there was a need for more organized administrative systems to handle land distribution, water rights, and tax collection. The growing agricultural surplus meant there were more people working in specialized crafts, administration, and military roles. As more land was cultivated, new wealth emerged, shifting traditional social standings. Some groups that were once on the fringes started gaining economic power, challenging the old aristocratic privileges. This demographic and economic shift gradually put pressure on the traditional governance systems that had been set up during the early Zhou. Social stratification became clearer and more formalized during the Western Zhou. A detailed aristocratic hierarchy emerged, with strict rankings dictating everything from what types of bronze vessels were allowed to marriage options, living arrangements, and burial practices. At the top of this hierarchy, theoretically at least, was the Zhou king, seen as the son of heaven with special ritual duties and privileges. Below him were various levels of territorial lords, whose status depended on their connections to the royal family and their historical standing. These aristocrats held on to hereditary privileges based on their lineage, backed up by detailed family records and ancestral rituals. Just below the aristocracy, a new class called the Shi started to emerge. These were skilled military men who served in noble households. They initially came from lower branches of noble families, but gradually included talented folks from non-aristocratic backgrounds, which allowed for some social mobility in an otherwise rigid system. The Shi took on military roles, managed estates, carried out diplomatic missions, and eventually filled administrative positions in the growing state structures. Their unique position between the aristocracy and the commoners would play a key role in the social evolution that followed, as this group eventually morphed into the scholar official class that would dominate later imperial governance. Most of the population was made up of agricultural producers, each with different levels of freedom and obligations. Some had hereditary land rights, but still owed taxes to local lords. Others worked as tenants on aristocratic estates, directly serving elite landowners. At the bottom of the social ladder were enslaved people captured during military campaigns, who provided labor for wealthy households and public projects. This social hierarchy, while varying by region, set patterns that would stick around with some changes in the years to come. The intellectual groundwork laid during the Western Zhou turned out to be incredibly lasting. Early Zhou texts introduced ideas that became central to later political and philosophical thought. The Book of Documents kept records of important governance principles attributed to key figures like the Duke of Zhou. The Book of Poetry gathered court songs, folk tunes, and ritual hymns that reflected the diverse culture of early Zhou society. The Book of Changes set up a complex system of divination that later evolved into philosophical ideas about understanding cosmic patterns. The Book of Rites detailed ceremonies and proper behavior that shaped social interactions. These texts, even though they changed over time, preserved core ideas that would influence intellectual development for thousands of years. The idea of ritual propriety, or li, really became a key part of political philosophy, right? Unlike just relying on laws that punish. Fa, ritual propriety focused on teaching the right behavior through education and setting a good example. This approach emphasized moral growth instead of just external pressure, which laid the groundwork for how future philosophies would think about governance. Plus, the careful record-keeping that started during the Western Zhou set the stage for historical documentation that carried on through imperial times. The blending of political power with cosmic ideas also kicked off a way of thinking that would shape traditional intellectual views across various fields. As time went on during the Western Zhou, things began to change, and the original political structure started to crumble. The lords, who were once close relatives of the royal family, became more distant with each generation. By the 9th century BC, many regional rulers were only vaguely related to the Zhou king, which weakened the personal ties that had once kept political loyalty strong. People began to see themselves more as part of their local states rather than the far-off Zhou court, leading to unique cultural practices and political identities. On top of that, the royal family struggled to keep military power over wealthier vassals, who were building their own armies and pursuing their own agendas. Things got even tougher with outside pressures. Non-Zhou groups living along the northern and western borders, especially nomadic tribes benefiting from climate changes that favored their pastoral lifestyles, started launching more successful raids on agricultural settlements. The royal house just couldn't organize a solid defense against these attacks, which pushed regional lords to create their own military forces for protection. These local armies further chipped away at royal authority, as regional states leaned less on central support and began to develop their own strategic goals, sometimes at odds with what the royal family wanted. Economic shifts also played a big role in shaking up traditional social hierarchies. As agricultural production grew thanks to land reclamation and new technologies, wealth started flowing outside the control of the established aristocracy. Trade networks expanded beyond old limits, creating economic interests that crossed political lines. After around 800 BC, iron technology became more common, making effective tools and weapons accessible to more people, instead of just the aristocrats, who could afford the expensive bronze. These economic changes slowly eroded the material basis of the original political system, which had relied on centralized control over valuable goods and limited access to military tech. The big turning point came in 771 BC, when nomadic Quan tribes teamed up with unhappy vassals to attack the royal capital at Heijing. King Yu, who was reportedly too caught up with his concubine Laozi, lost support because of his unpredictable rule and disregard for succession traditions. According to the stories, he even lit beacon fires meant for military alerts just to entertain Laozi, which caused loyal forces to mobilize unnecessarily and led to a breakdown in trust regarding royal messages. When a real threat finally showed up, the warning system failed because vassals thought it was just another false alarm. The attackers sacked the capital, killed King Yu, and forced the court to escape east to the secondary capital at Luoyang. This event is often seen as the line between the Western Zhou and Eastern Zhou periods, marking a huge shift in political reality. Although a new king, Ming, was recognized by the loyal vassals, real power had shifted away from the royal court to the regional states. The Zhou monarchy would stick around for another 5 centuries, but would never regain its authority beyond the areas it directly controlled. Instead, a new political era took shape, defined by competition among regional states that only pretended to respect Zhou ritual supremacy. The move east changed the Zhou political landscape dramatically. The court left the western territories to local powers and non-Zhou peoples, losing important agricultural resources and populations. The new capital at Luoyang, while centrally located, didn't have the same defensive perks as the western capital, which was protected by mountains. The royal domain shrank significantly, cutting down direct access to resources and military recruitment. Most importantly, this defeat shattered the idea that Zhou kings were invulnerable and protected by heaven, which weakened the very foundations of royal authority. This fragmentation, while showing a breakdown of central authority, actually sparked an incredible burst of cultural and intellectual creativity in the centuries that followed. With the strict rules from the powerful center out of the way, regional states started to play around with all sorts of administrative systems, military tech, economic strategies, and cultural practices. The competition pushed these states to innovate, seeking advantages over their rivals through smart reforms instead of just brute military force. Political instability also got thinkers buzzing, as they searched for new ways to establish social order in the face of crumbling traditional structures. Despite the political chaos, the cultural unity that had formed during the Western Zhou remained strong, creating a shared civilizational framework where various political entities could operate, compete, and grow. The legacy of the Western Zhou continued to hold significant sway even after its eventual collapse. The ritual systems that were set up during this time laid down patterns for social relationships that would shape cultural norms for ages to come. The administrative practices that developed in the royal court and major regional states became templates for future governance. The Fengxian system, although it changed a lot over time, remained a useful way to understand the relationship between central authority and local governance. Perhaps most importantly, the mandate of heaven doctrine provided a lasting theoretical foundation for legitimate rule, influencing state ideology throughout imperial history. This mix of political failure alongside lasting cultural influence is what really defines the Western Zhou legacy. The inability to keep effective central authority for long revealed the weaknesses in the original political setup. Yet the cultural patterns, philosophical ideas, and social norms that emerged during this formative period showed remarkable resilience, adapting through political changes while keeping their core intact. This ongoing tension between political fragility and cultural strength would shape much of the historical development that followed, as dynasties rose and fell, while cultural patterns stuck around through political upheavals. When the Zhou court moved to Luoyang in 770 BC, it kicked off a new era marked by a decline in central authority and a rise in competition among regional powers. Although the royal family continued to exist, handing out titles and performing sacred rituals, real political control shifted entirely to local lords who recognized the sovereign in name only, acting with more independence. This fragmentation unexpectedly unleashed a wave of cultural and intellectual creativity, as rival states vied for advantage through administrative innovations, military reforms, and philosophical explorations. Historians usually break this lengthy period into two parts: the Spring and Autumn era, named after the Spring and Autumn Annals Chronicle, and the later Warring States period. These times saw a gradual shift from a supposedly unified realm governed by feudal relationships to a multi-state system characterized by fierce competition, diplomatic maneuvering, and eventually total warfare, leading to imperial reunification. During the Spring and Autumn period, 771 to 476 BC, around 148 small states existed within what was once Zhou territory. These states varied widely in size and power, from tiny city-states to larger regional powers controlling multiple cities and vast agricultural lands. Over time, Power became concentrated as larger states absorbed their smaller neighbors. By the mid-period, about a dozen major players like Lu, Jin, Qi, Chu, Qin, Song, and Yan dominated the political scene, maintaining complex relationships with each other and the increasingly sidelined Zhou royal house. The political landscape of this period called for new ways to keep stability. With royal authority on the decline, powerful territorial lords emerged as hegemons, who managed to enforce a sense of order without directly claiming the mandate of heaven. The first recognized hegemon, Duke Huan of Qi, teamed up with his advisor, Guanzhong, to reform internal administration while asserting leadership among states through military might and diplomatic savvy. He organized interstate conferences, led coalitions against non-Zhou barbarian groups encroaching from the edges, and intervened in smaller states to settle succession disputes or quell disorder. While the Zhou sovereign remained respected in theory, in practice, they were quite powerless. A telling incident happened in 707 BC when King Huan of Zhou tried to take real control by leading a military campaign against a rebellious state. The attempt ended in disaster, showcasing royal weakness. After that, subsequent kings largely gave up on such pretensions, focusing instead on ritual duties and trying to survive by playing larger states against each other through diplomacy and symbolic gestures. As states grew in territory and population, administrative complexity steadily increased. The old aristocratic governance system, which relied mainly on personal relationships and hereditary privilege, became less effective for managing larger political entities. Innovative ministers introduced reforms to boost central control, increase agricultural output, and better mobilize military resources. In Qi, for instance, Guanzhong rolled out population registration, standardized weights and measures, monopolized salt and iron production, and reorganized military units. These administrative innovations set the stage for later states to adopt similar practices. Military affairs also saw significant changes. The chariot warfare of earlier times, where noble warriors engaged in ritualized combat governed by chivalric codes, gradually gave way to larger infantry armies. Economic shifts allowed states to field bigger forces, as agricultural surpluses supported professional soldiers. Military roles that were once reserved for aristocrats became open to talented individuals, regardless of their background. The state of Qin led the way in military reforms under Xianggong, creating armies organized through land-based conscription instead of relying solely on aristocratic levies. Interstate relations really got more sophisticated during this time. Diplomatic envoys started traveling regularly between courts, negotiating alliances, trade deals, and even marriage arrangements. Ruler summits became a thing, complete with elaborate protocols that showed off their relative status and power. A pretty complex system of interstate law popped up too, laying down rules for things like diplomatic immunity, treaty obligations, and what counts as a legit reason for war. Sure, these agreements were often broken, but they were attempts to manage conflicts within a shared cultural framework. Technological advancements really picked up speed throughout the Eastern Zhou. After 600 BC, iron metallurgy spread like wildfire, leading to better agricultural tools, more effective weapons, and expanded construction capabilities. Crossbow technology came onto the scene around the 7th century BC, shaking up battlefield tactics by letting lightly trained infantry challenge heavily armored aristocratic warriors. Plus, sophisticated irrigation systems boosted agricultural production, and urban centers grew larger and more complex, with some regional capitals housing populations of 50,000 or more, all protected by massive rammed earth fortifications that stretched for miles. Social mobility started to rise as traditional aristocratic privileges began to fade. The Xi class, which started as lower aristocrats serving in noble households, morphed into a broader group that included military officers, administrative experts, and intellectuals. Merit began to compete with birth as a way to get ahead, although aristocratic lineages still held significant advantages. In advanced states like Qin, Qi, and Chu, talented commoners could actually rise to ministerial positions based on their skills in administration or military prowess. Economic development really transformed society at its core. Agricultural production ramped up thanks to iron tools, better irrigation, and more efficient farming methods. Specialized craft production expanded beyond just luxury goods for the aristocrats, reaching into utilitarian items for everyday markets. Regional trade networks blossomed, initially focusing on prestige goods like jade, bronze vessels, and fine textiles, but soon including bulk items like grain, timber, and metal ores. Early monetary systems emerged too, with cowrie shells, metal spades, and knife-shaped currencies making commercial exchanges smoother. The intellectual buzz of this era led to what we now call the 100 Schools of Thought, a remarkable explosion of philosophical exploration, tackling big questions about ethics, politics, and metaphysics. This intellectual revolution was a direct response to the socio-political climate of the time. With traditional certainties shaken by political fragmentation and rapid social change, thinkers were on the hunt for new foundations for moral and political order in a world that felt increasingly unstable. Confucius, 551 to 479 BC, stood out as the most influential figure in this intellectual scene. Coming from a declining aristocratic family in the state of Lu, he aimed to restore social harmony by reviving and reinterpreting ancient rituals. Although he couldn't secure a lasting official position, he traveled between states, advising rulers and gathering disciples who recorded his teachings. His focus on moral growth, proper social relationships, and governance through virtue rather than force laid down a framework for political thought that would shape the future. A variety of competing philosophical ideas emerged. Mohists pushed for universal love that went beyond family and state boundaries, critiqued expensive rituals as wasteful, and championed merit-based governance. Taoist thinkers like Laozi questioned the need for active government, advocating for a return to simplicity and natural processes free from human interference. Legalist theorists, such as Shang Yang, pushed for strengthening state power through strict laws, agricultural growth, and military readiness, often ignoring traditional morals and rituals. By the late spring and autumn period, warfare frequency and scale surged dramatically. The Battle of Bai in 597 BC, involving Jin and Sius, saw armies numbering in the tens of thousands far larger than the smaller forces of earlier times. Victory began to hinge more on resource mobilization, logistical capabilities, and strategic planning rather than individual heroics or ritualized combat between aristocratic warriors. Fortifications became more advanced as siege warfare became the norm, with extended campaigns lasting months or even years, replacing the brief seasonal expeditions of the past. The partition of Jin in 453 BC was a huge turning point, marking the shift from the spring and autumn to the Warring States periods. Three major ministerial families, the Han, Shao, and Wei, split up Jin's territory, wiping out the ruling lineage and creating independent states. This change flipped the interstate system on its head, moving away from the old way of hereditary rule from the Zhao to a cutthroat competition where states had to completely transform to survive. During the Warring States period, we saw some wild military, administrative, and social changes as these competing powers rolled out bold reforms just to keep up in a harsh environment. Warfare evolved from small-scale battles with limited goals to all-out conflicts aimed at wiping out entire states. Professional armies, often numbering in the hundreds of thousands, marched under centralized commands, armed with standardized weapons from state arsenals. Iron weapons took over from bronze, and cavalry units started to support infantry and chariots. Crossbows became the go-to weapon, easily piercing armor from a distance. Administrative reforms reached revolutionary heights. The state of Qin, led by Shangyang and other legalist ministers, went through the most sweeping changes. Aristocratic privilege was tossed aside in favor of merit-based appointments, focusing on real achievements, especially in the military. The population was registered, taxed, and conscripted. Land ownership shifted to privatization, allowing people to buy, sell, and consolidate holdings, which was a big change from the earlier communal system. Legal codes came with tough penalties for violations, but also offered significant rewards for farming and military service. Other states began to adopt their own reforms, often borrowing from Qin while tweaking them for local needs. Wei reorganized its land into counties run by appointed officials instead of hereditary nobles. Sichu pushed aggressively south, bringing diverse peoples into its governance. Qi got smart with its commercial policies to cash in on booming trade networks. Meanwhile, the once lesser state of Yan in the northeast built up strong defenses against nomadic groups and established its own centralized governance. Diplomacy got pretty intricate during this time. The ideas of vertical and horizontal alliances, Heizong and Lianheng, shaped interstate relations. Horizontal alliances aimed to unite multiple states against a common enemy, especially as Qin grew more powerful. Vertical alliances were one-on-one deals between Qin and other states, often brokered by wandering diplomats or strategists who offered their skills to various courts. Notable persuaders like Su Qin and Zheng Yi traveled between capitals, crafting complex diplomatic arrangements that could change in the blink of an eye. Cultural developments kept thriving despite the constant warfare, or maybe because of it. Each regional state built its own unique traditions while engaging in broader cultural dialogues. Sio Shu supported shamanic traditions and produced distinctive art styles featuring flowing lines and mythical creatures. Qi became known for its maritime trade and practical scholarship. The successor states of Jin absorbed influences from steppe cultures through their interactions with northern peoples. These regional differences enriched the overall cultural scene while still sharing core literary, philosophical, and political ideas. Urban life really took off as capitals grew to unprecedented sizes. Lindsay, the capital of Qi, was said to have over 200,000 residents within its massive walls. City planning became more sophisticated, with grid street patterns, specialized commercial areas, and grand architecture. Markets operated under increasingly standardized regulations. Urban populations diversified, including merchants, artisans, officials, military personnel, and educators, alongside traditional aristocrats. The elite's taste for luxury spurred the production of fine textiles, lacquerware, jade carvings, and other prestigious goods. Military technology advanced rapidly as well. Different states developed specialized units. Siège for its strong infantry, Wei for its disciplined chariot forces, Qin for its highly effective crossbowmen, and Zhao for adopting nomadic cavalry tactics learned from steppe peoples. Fortifications became more complex, featuring multiple walls, moats, watchtowers, and extensive defensive earthworks. Logistics saw huge improvements as states built road networks, grain storage facilities, and supply depots to support large armies on long campaigns. The warring states' endgame kicked off around 300 BC, when Qin solidified its status as the most powerful player. Its advantages: productive agriculture in the safe Wei River Valley, a streamlined administrative system free from aristocratic privilege, a merit-based military, and a strategic position shielded by mountains enabled its aggressive expansion. Under King Zheng, who later called himself the first emperor, Qin systematically wiped out rival powers through a mix of diplomatic isolation and overwhelming military might. The final conquest happened fast. Han fell in 230 BC, followed by Zhao and Wei. The once mighty Si Chu put up a good fight, but ultimately fell in 223 BC. After tough campaigns, Yan and Qi, the last independent states, fell in 222 and 221 BC, respectively. In just a decade, a multi-state system that had been around for 5 centuries disappeared, replaced by a unified imperial structure that, despite some ups and downs, would serve as the political model for the next 2,000 years. The Qing Dynasty, 221–206 BC. This incredible shift from a bunch of competing states to a unified empire wasn't just about military conquest. It was the result of a bunch of long-term changes. The decline of aristocratic privilege in favor of centralized power, the streamlining of administrative practices, the standardization of laws, the professionalization of the military, and the rise of ideologies that justified absolute rule. These developments came out of the intense competition between states during the Eastern Zhou period and laid the groundwork for an imperial system that would last in various forms until the early 20th century. So, the Eastern Zhou is both an ending and a beginning. It marked the end of the decentralized aristocratic order set up by the Western Zhou, and acted as a breeding ground for the centralized imperial governance that would define the coming millennia. Its legacy is a bit mixed in historical memory. Confucian scholars looked back on this time with mixed feelings, mourning the chaos and warfare, but also celebrating the intellectual and cultural boom it sparked. Political thinkers studied the Eastern Zhou era for insights into statecraft, diplomacy, and military organization. The tension between cultural unity and political fragmentation that started during this time would keep popping up in later history as a key theme in political development. Amid the chaos of competing states that defined the last century of the Eastern Zhou, one power slowly emerged as the dominant force through smart reforms and military prowess. The northwestern state of Qin, once seen as semi-barbaric by its more cultured rivals, transformed itself into a military powerhouse that would conquer all opposition and establish the first real imperial system. This amazing rise from relative obscurity to total dominance happened thanks to careful policy decisions, geographic advantages, and visionary leadership, leading to the creation of an empire that, while short-lived, would set the stage for governance patterns lasting 2 millennia. Qin's journey to the top began long before its final conquests. Nestled in the fertile Wei River Valley and shielded by mountains on three sides, Qin enjoyed natural defensive benefits while also supporting productive farming. This geographic advantage provided safety from attacks while allowing for well-planned defenses against less protected neighbors. From this secure base, Qin rulers methodically built military strength through internal reforms that greatly boosted state capacity beyond traditional limits. The transformation really kicked into high gear during the mid-4th century, when Duke Zhao appointed Shang Yang as chief minister. This forward-thinking reformer rolled out sweeping changes that completely reshaped Qin society and governance. Drawing on legalist principles that put state power above traditional morals or aristocratic privilege, Shang Yang created a state laser-focused on agricultural output and military effectiveness. His reforms took aim at old social structures while building new institutions that served state interests. Land that used to be held communally was redistributed to individual households, making them responsible for taxes and military service. This privatization not only boosted agricultural productivity, but also allowed for better population registration and control. The old aristocracy lost their hereditary privileges, replaced by a merit-based system where advancement depended on agricultural success or military achievement rather than noble birth. New administrative divisions replaced kingship-based governance, organizing households into mutual responsibility groups accountable for each member's actions. Standardized laws imposed strict punishments for violations, while offering significant rewards for compliance with state goals. These groundbreaking changes faced strong resistance from traditional elites, but Duke Zhao consistently backed Shang Yang, allowing these reforms to take root. The results were devastating for Qin's rivals. Agricultural output skyrocketed, providing surplus resources for military campaigns. Population growth sped up as incentives for larger families, aligned with state interests in boosting tax revenue and military recruitment. Social mobility based on merit rather than birth opened doors for talented individuals from all backgrounds, dramatically expanding the talent pool for civil and military leadership. Most importantly, these reforms created an unprecedented capacity for the state to mobilize resources for warfare. The mutual responsibility system made family groups accountable for producing required soldiers, while the reward system encouraged military success through land grants, tax breaks, and status elevation based on battlefield achievements. Standardized military units replaced aristocratic levies, resulting in more effective forces through consistent training and equipment. Together, these changes produced armies of unprecedented size and effectiveness, deployed by a state singularly focused on territorial expansion. The years following Shang Yang's reforms saw steady Qin expansion at the expense of its rivals. Even after Shang Yang's downfall and execution following Duke Xu's death, his institutional innovations largely remained intact, continuing to provide superior state capacity. Under King Xiaoxiang, Qin forces annexed significant territories from neighboring Wei and Han. Subsequent campaigns against Zhao secured control of the Ordos region, adding more resources and strategic depth. By the mid-3rd century, Qin had clearly positioned itself as the strongest contender for eventual domination. Military innovation complemented these institutional advantages. Qin armies pioneered effective combined arms tactics, integrating infantry, cavalry, and crossbowmen into coordinated operations. Standardized weapons and equipment produced in state arsenals provided technological consistency that rival forces lacked. Professional commanders, chosen based on ability rather than birth, led these forces with strategic sophistication that outmatched their opponents. Logistics systems supported extended campaigns far from home, allowing for sustained offensive operations instead of mere raiding. The final push for unification gained momentum after the young ruler Yin Zheng took direct control in 238 BC upon reaching adulthood. Later known as Qin Shi Huang, first emperor of Qin. This incredibly ambitious monarch combined ruthless determination with strategic patience in his quest for total conquest. Working alongside capable ministers like Li Si and military leaders such as Wang Jian, he executed a comprehensive strategy that targeted each rival state one by one. Instead of launching simultaneous campaigns that could risk hostile alliances, he prioritized diplomatic isolation before military action. In this methodical approach, Qin agents used bribery, misinformation, and exploitation of internal divisions to thwart effective coalitions against them. The famous strategist Fan Sui advised, distant states should be won by accommodation, neighboring states by force. Following this principle, Qin diplomacy maintained peaceful relations with distant powers while concentrating military force against immediate neighbors, preventing coordinated resistance that could have balanced Qin's advantages. Once the final conquest began, it unfolded with remarkable speed. Han fell first in early 230 BC, with its territory directly integrated into the Qin administrative system. Zhao followed 3 years later, despite fierce resistance. Wei, already weakened by earlier defeats, succumbed with minimal fighting a year later. Xiu, the most powerful remaining opponent, mounted significant resistance under King Fu, but ultimately collapsed after devastating campaigns led by Wang Jian in 223 BC. The northeastern states of Yan and Qi, isolated from potential allies, fell in rapid succession over the next 2 years. By 221 BC, Yin Zheng had achieved what countless warriors and statesmen had attempted for centuries: the complete unification of all major states under a single authority. The political implications of this unprecedented achievement demanded new ways of thinking. Previous Zhou kings had claimed nominal overlordship while really presiding over a multi-state system. Yin Zheng's conquest created something entirely different: direct administrative control over a vast territory without independent political entities within its borders. This revolutionary change needed new terminology to express its nature. Rejecting the traditional royal title, Wang, he declared himself Shi Huangdi, first August Emperor, claiming a universal sovereignty that was unprecedented in prior political experience. This title intentionally echoed ancient references to legendary sage rulers, while asserting superiority over them. The term Hong evoked the mythical 3 Augusts who established human civilization, while Di recalled the 5 emperors who supposedly ruled during the Golden Age. By styling himself first emperor, he positioned his achievement as the start of an entirely new historical era, superseding all previous arrangements. This ideological statement signaled that the age of competing states had ended for good, replaced by a universal empire meant to last for 10,000 generations. After achieving military unification, the first emperor and his chief minister, Li Si, launched an ambitious standardization program aimed at transforming the conquered territories from a collection of distinct states into a single, integrated entity. This systematic effort focused on key aspects of daily life, administration, and cultural expression. Their revolutionary program sought to erase the separate identities that had developed during centuries of political division, replacing them with uniform practices that directly served imperial authority. The standardization of writing was one of the most impactful reforms during this time. Before everything was unified, different states had their own writing styles. Even though they shared a common origin, they had developed unique regional quirks. The first emperor stepped in and mandated the use of the small seal script across all territories, wiping out those regional differences. Officials were tasked with creating standardized character lists to establish uniform writing methods. This move not only made communication smoother for administration, but also reinforced a sense of cultural unity under imperial rule. In a similar vein, the push for standardization also extended to everyday commerce. The various weights and measures that different regions used were replaced by a single set of imperial standards. Officials distributed metal weight models to markets throughout the empire as reference points. Standard measuring containers for grain and other goods replaced the local variations that had existed before. One of the most notable changes was the standardization of axle widths for carts and wagons, allowing vehicles to travel on the same roads and wheel ruts across the empire. These practical steps made trade easier and symbolized the unity of the empire in daily life. The most groundbreaking change, though, was the dismantling of the hereditary aristocracy that had ruled for centuries. The traditional feudal system, which had already been weakened during the Warring States period, was completely taken apart under Qing. Aristocratic domains were abolished and replaced with a new system of commanderies and counties, run by appointed officials, chosen for their skills rather than their family background. These officials had limited terms and could be reassigned or removed at the emperor's discretion, which helped prevent the rise of local power bases that could challenge central authority. This new structure was a game-changer, as the empire was divided into 36 commanderies, each further split into counties. Each level had both civil and military officials, which kept local authority from concentrating too much power. Regularly rotating officials between posts also helped stop the formation of loyalty networks that could threaten imperial control. Standardized procedures governed every aspect of administration, with strict regulations and reporting requirements ensuring everyone followed central directives. Though this bureaucratic setup would later be modified, it laid the groundwork for imperial governance that lasted until the 20th century. Legal standardization went hand in hand with these administrative reforms. The first emperor introduced a single legal code that replaced all regional laws. This system, heavily influenced by legalist philosophy, imposed harsh penalties for violations while limiting judicial discretion. It even included collective responsibility, making family members and neighbors accountable for reporting crimes. The principle of uniformity was clear. The same crime shall receive the same punishment, regardless of rank. While there were some exceptions for agricultural producers and military personnel to promote state interests, the law treated everyone else equally. However, these sweeping changes met with strong pushback from those who had benefited from the old system or disagreed with the legalist principles behind Qing governance. The imperial response was brutal in quashing dissent. The infamous burning of books and burying of scholars incident illustrates this suppression. Following Li Si's advice, the first emperor ordered the destruction of texts that promoted alternative political ideas, especially Confucian works that advocated traditional values and limited government. Only practical texts on medicine, agriculture, divination, and forestry were spared. Traditional accounts suggest that around 400 scholars were executed for owning banned books or criticizing imperial policies. While modern historians debate the accuracy of these numbers, there's no doubt that there was a systematic effort to suppress intellectual traditions that challenged legalist orthodoxy. This move aimed to eliminate any ideas that could justify opposition to imperial authority, creating a uniform ideology to match the centralized administration. The massive infrastructure projects during the first emperor's reign showcased imperial power while providing real benefits and jobs for the large population under central control. A network of roads radiated from the capital Xianyang, with standardized width highways linking all major administrative centers. Regulations even dictated that trees be planted along these routes to offer shade for travelers. Carriages had to travel on the right side, as per imperial decree, which helped establish traffic patterns and maintain order. This transportation network made it easy to move troops, officials, and goods throughout the empire. Most famously, existing defensive walls built by former states were connected and extended into what we now know as the Great Wall. Hundreds of thousands of laborers, including convicts, conscripts, and soldiers, worked on this monumental project, which aimed to provide protection against nomadic incursions from the north. Instead of a single continuous wall, as often imagined, this defensive system consisted of multiple overlapping fortifications adapted to the local terrain. Watchtowers, garrison points, and signal stations complemented the physical barriers, creating a cohesive defense network that safeguarded agricultural lands from raids. These sweeping reforms and ambitious projects highlighted the first emperor's drive for unification and control, setting the stage for a new era in Chinese governance. The Ling Canal represented another monumental engineering achievement. This artificial waterway connected the Xiang River, flowing south to the Yangtze, with the Li rivers, flowing into the Pearl River system, creating a transportation route linking northern and southern territories. This project facilitated the movement of military forces and supplies while stimulating commerce between regions with complementary resources and products. The canal's construction demonstrated sophisticated hydrological engineering, including precise elevation calculations, lock systems, and embankment reinforcement techniques preventing erosion. Personal projects that showcased imperial grandeur went hand in hand with these practical works. The Apang Palace complex, situated near the capital, was massive, reportedly able to host up to 10,000 guests for court ceremonies. Built to flaunt imperial magnificence, its audience hall stretched hundreds of meters long, and archaeological findings back up these grand descriptions. Similarly, the imperial mausoleum complex near Mount Li was built on a grand scale. This extraordinary project kicked off right after the first emperor took charge, employing hundreds of thousands of workers over decades to create an artificial mountain filled with elaborate burial chambers. The famous terracotta army found in this funerary complex highlights both the technical skills and organizational might of the empire. Thousands of life-sized warrior figures, each with unique facial features and accurately depicted deer, accompanied the imperial tomb, along with terracotta horses, chariots, and weapons. This ceramic army, arranged in a precise military formation, was a groundbreaking shift, replacing human sacrifice with symbolic representations while showcasing imperial power that even extended into the afterlife. Even with these monumental achievements in unification, standardization, and infrastructure, the Qin imperial system had serious structural flaws It made it unsustainable in the long run. The regime's heavy demands on the population through taxes, conscription, and forced labor sparked widespread resentment across all social classes. The harsh legal system made everyday life a struggle for ordinary folks, with minor offenses leading to severe punishments or assignments to dangerous labor projects. Even officials lived in constant fear, knowing that administrative failures or perceived disloyalty could lead to swift and harsh consequences, no matter their past service. Economic strain grew under these pressures. Agricultural production took a hit as farmers juggled rising taxes and being pulled away from their fields for labor service or military duties. Business activity struggled under oppressive rules and arbitrary confiscation. Maintenance of essential infrastructure lagged as resources got redirected to prestige projects and military campaigns. Most importantly, the removal of local elites stripped away the social structures that had historically bridged the gap between state demands and local populations, leading to direct confrontations between imperial authority and worn-out subjects. As the first emperor's reign progressed, his personality only made these structural issues worse. Historical accounts tell of his growing paranoia, which showed through harsh punishments for perceived critics and obsessive security measures. Multiple assassination attempts fueled his suspicion, leading to elaborate protective protocols, like having several identical imperial carriages traveling together to confuse potential attackers. His obsession with immortality reportedly grew with age, diverting significant resources toward alchemical research and quests for a legendary elixir of eternal life. The regime hit a major crisis when the first emperor died suddenly while traveling in eastern territories during the 35th year of his rule. The succession process instantly revealed the imperial system's vulnerabilities. Instead of announcing the death right away, Chief Eunuch Zhao Gao and Prime Minister Li Si kept it under wraps while heading back to the capital. During this journey, they altered the emperor's final wishes, swapping the designated heir, Fusu, for a more compliant younger son. This conspiracy worked at first, but quickly fell apart as Zhao Gao eliminated Li Si and took control of the new emperor Hahai, ruling from behind the scenes while imperial governance crumbled. Popular uprisings broke out less than a year after the first emperor's death, when Chen Sheng and Wu Guang, conscripts being marched to frontier garrison duty, faced execution for being late due to flooding. Realizing their fate, they decided to rebel, and their movement quickly spread among the exhausted populace. While these initial rebel leaders met their end relatively quickly, their uprising sparked widespread revolts across the empire. Local leaders emerged in former states, many claiming to restore previous ruling houses while rallying significant military forces from discontented citizens. Amid this chaotic fragmentation, two leaders rose to prominence. Liu Bang, a peasant who had climbed to minor official status, led forces that captured the Qin heartland and capital. On the other hand, Xiang Yu, an aristocratic military commander from Chu, commanded larger armies and initially held a stronger position, distributing territories among various supporters while keeping central lands for himself. The uneasy alliance between these two quickly broke down into open warfare, which continued for several years after the Qing Dynasty officially ended in 207 BC. The short-lived Qin imperial rule, about 15 years of unified governance under the first emperor, followed by a brief chaotic succession before total collapse, belies its significant historical impact. Even though it failed to sustain itself, the Qin Revolution laid down fundamental patterns that future dynasties would tweak, but never abandon. The idea of unified imperial rule replaced the multi-state system permanently in political thought and practice. The administrative division into provinces and counties took over from aristocratic domains as the primary framework for territorial control. A centralized bureaucracy, chosen by merit rather than birth, became the standard governing method. Despite later compromises with hereditary privilege, the Qin collapse showed that extreme legalist methods created unsustainable pressures, leading to their own downfall. Yet future regimes kept many legalist administrative techniques while softening their harshest aspects and incorporating Confucian elements to address their shortcomings. This blend practical legalist methods wrapped in Confucian ethical rhetoric would define imperial governance for the next 2 millennia. The Qin thus stands as both an end and a beginning, the culmination of centuries-long trends toward centralization and bureaucratization, and the foundation for subsequent imperial systems that would last, with modifications, until the early 20th century. In the wake of the Qin collapse, 2 major players stepped up from the sea of rebel forces to battle for dominance. This clash, known as the Xiu-Han contention, would shape the future of the imperial order. On one side was Xiang Yu, an aristocratic commander from Xia, who embodied the traditional warrior spirit and heroic leadership. On the other was Liu Bang, a commoner who climbed to minor official status before the rebellion, showcasing a practical mindset and relatable charm. Their 4-year conflict highlighted their contrasting styles of leadership and laid the groundwork for a new imperial system that would last for centuries. Xiang Yu initially had the upper hand, thanks to his martial reputation and larger army. After a decisive win against the Qin forces, he divided the empire among 19 kings, mostly from the former ruling families of conquered states. This setup effectively brought back a modified version of the pre-Qin multi-state system, while recognizing his authority as hegemon king of Western Xia. He kept the central territories for himself and handed out peripheral kingdoms to allies and potential rivals, including assigning the Han region in the remote Bashu area to Liu Bang. However, this arrangement quickly became unstable as the tensions between central control and fragmentation lingered. Liu Bang showed a knack for politics by carefully building alliances with those unhappy with Xiang Yu's settlement, while solidifying his grip on his territory. When conflict broke out, he faced early defeats against Xiang Yu's stronger military, but slowly chipped away at his opponent's position through strategic adaptability. While Xiang Yu excelled in battlefield tactics and personal combat, Liu Bang was a master of psychological warfare, diplomatic maneuvering, and patience. He didn't hesitate to retreat when necessary, broke agreements when it suited him, and focused on the long game instead of seeking short-term glory. The differences between these leaders went beyond military tactics to their core philosophies of governance. Xiang Yu, despite rebelling against the Qin, represented traditional aristocratic values, placing a high value on personal honor, martial virtue, and hereditary privilege. Liu Bang, on the other hand, was all about practical adaptation, willing to bring in talented individuals regardless of their background, and focusing on sustainable governance rather than just heroic leadership. These contrasting approaches were evident in how they treated conquered territories. Xiang Yu allowed his troops to loot and destroy the Qin capital, which turned local populations against him. Liu Bang kept his troops disciplined and enacted moderate policies, winning over defectors from his rival. The turning point came at Xia, where Liu Bang's forces trapped Xiang Yu's army with a clever maneuver. According to dramatic traditional accounts, Zhang Yu's remaining troops found themselves surrounded, while Han soldiers sang Siqiu folk songs, hinting at the desertion of his countrymen. Instead of surrendering, Xiang Yu fought through enemy lines with a handful of followers before taking his own life by a river, famously declaring, "Heaven, not my ability, caused my defeat." This tragic end cemented his legacy as a heroic figure rather than a failed contender, becoming a powerful cultural symbol of martial virtue despite his political downfall. After this victory in early 202 BC, Liu Bang founded the Han Dynasty, which would rule for nearly 4 centuries, with just one brief interruption. Taking the title Emperor Gaozu, he faced challenges strikingly similar to those encountered by the Qin founder a generation earlier: how to create a sustainable centralized government after years of division and warfare. His approach was marked by pragmatic moderation, informed by the lessons learned from the Qin's downfall, as he sought to balance the centralization needed for imperial unity with the flexibility required for stability and popular support. The early Han imperial structure reflected this balanced strategy. Gaozu kept the Qin administrative divisions into commanderies, directly managed by central appointees in key areas. At the same time, he set up vassal kingdoms in peripheral regions, often governed by trusted relatives or supporters who enjoyed considerable autonomy under nominal imperial authority. This hybrid system created concentric zones of imperial control, direct administration in the core, diminishing central authority in outer areas, and diplomatic relationships beyond imperial borders, which also introduced potential long-term challenges due to divided authority. This setup provided immediate stability while acknowledging the practical limits of centralized control over such vast territories. Legal reform showcased this moderate approach, while retaining the bureaucratic framework of Qin legal codes. Gaozu significantly softened their severity by eliminating the harshest punishments and simplifying regulations. The well-known 3-chapter law replaced the complicated Qin statutes with clear provisions addressing homicide, assault, and theft. More legislation followed to tackle other issues, but overall, the legal burden on ordinary citizens dropped dramatically. Collective punishment largely vanished, allowing families to live without the constant fear of being punished for the actions of their relatives. These changes reduced bureaucratic control at local levels, but fostered the popular support essential for dynastic stability. Economic policies also struck a balance between state interests and popular welfare. Tax rates dropped significantly from Qin levels, paving the way for agricultural recovery after the ravages of war and excessive taxation. The government relaxed its monopolies on salt and iron, allowing private businesses to thrive in these lucrative sectors. State control over coinage remained in place, ensuring monetary stability that benefited commerce. Land distribution received special attention through policies that favored smallholder agriculture over large estates. The regime even acknowledged tax exemptions for impoverished regions recovering from warfare, showcasing a flexibility that was impossible under the rigid Qin administration. These measures gradually restored prosperity while ensuring enough revenue for imperial operations. Intellectual policy marked a significant departure from Qin practices. While the first emperor had tried to wipe out competing intellectual traditions through book burning and scholar suppression, Gaozu embraced intellectual pluralism, allowing various philosophical approaches to coexist. Confucian scholars found roles within the developing bureaucracy, alongside practitioners of more pragmatic traditions. The famous debate on salt and iron during a later reign exemplified this pluralistic approach, as court officials openly debated competing economic theories based on different philosophical premises. This intellectual openness fostered adaptive policy development that was impossible under rigid ideological constraints. Perhaps most importantly, Gaozu implemented personnel policies that prioritized practical effectiveness over theoretical purity. Unlike the Qin's focus on absolute loyalty and ideological conformity, early Han administration valued competence from diverse backgrounds. The emperor famously appointed former opponents to high positions when they showed useful skills. His pragmatic remark that "I conquered the empire from horseback, but one cannot govern from horseback," highlighted the need for experienced administrators, even if they had previously served rival regimes. This meritocratic approach maximized available talent while demonstrating confidence that practical incentives would ensure loyalty more effectively than ideological tests or punitive measures. The resulting government structure was neither a complete return to pre-Qin traditions nor a straightforward continuation of Qin innovations. Instead, it was a creative adaptation that drew from both while introducing new features. From the Qin came administration, standardized procedures, and bureaucratic structure. Pre-Qin traditions contributed ethical governance concepts, intellectual diversity, and an awareness of the practical limits of central authority. The Han innovation lay in balancing these competing elements through flexible application rather than rigid adherence to any single model. This pragmatic approach, avoiding extremes while incorporating useful elements from various traditions, set the tone for imperial governance for the next 2 millennia. Despite Gaozu's success in establishing stable governance after years of conflict, the early Han faced ongoing challenges that required constant attention. The Xiongnu nomadic confederations along the northern frontier posed the most immediate external threat. These steppe peoples controlled vast territories beyond the Great Wall, launching periodic raids on agricultural settlements and disrupting trade routes. Their mobile lifestyle and superior cavalry made them nearly impossible to defeat decisively through conventional military tactics. Unlike settled states with fixed capitals and infrastructure vulnerable to capture, the Xiongnu could simply retreat into the steppe when faced with superior forces, only to return once imperial armies withdrew. Gaozu personally led early campaigns against these northern tribes, but the results were disappointing. During one expedition, his forces found themselves encircled at Pingsheng, narrowly escaping total destruction when unexpected fog provided cover for their retreat. This embarrassing experience highlighted the limitations of traditional Chinese military tactics against nomadic foes and necessitated the development of alternative strategies. The resulting Hekin policy established tributary relationships with Xiongnu leaders through diplomatic marriages, trade agreements, and regular gift exchanges, which appeared as submission to contemporary Chinese observers. This pragmatic approach minimized border conflicts while allowing internal development during the dynasty's formative years. Internal challenges were equally pressing, particularly the tension between central authority and the semi-autonomous kingdoms established during the dynasty's foundation. These vassal states, many ruled by imperial relatives, controlled significant territories, maintained independent military forces, collected local taxes, and operated their own administrative systems under nominal imperial sovereignty. While this arrangement had provided crucial stability during the dynasty's establishment, it increasingly threatened imperial unity as the rulers of these kingdoms pursued independent policies and accumulated power that could challenge the throne itself. Several major rebellions demonstrated this danger. Just 7 years after the dynasty's founding, 7 kingdoms rose up against central authority in the Rebellion of the 7 States. Although ultimately suppressed, this coordinated uprising revealed structural weaknesses in the original imperial settlement. Similar rebellions occurred periodically throughout the early Han, culminating in the massive rebellion of the 7 kingdoms during Emperor Qing's reign. Each suppression led to territorial reorganization, reducing vassal state autonomy while expanding directly administered commanderies. This gradual centralization process unfolded over several reigns, showcasing institutional learning and adaptation rather than rigid adherence to the founders' original arrangements. Succession issues added more drama after Gaozu's death. His chosen heir, later known as Emperor Hui, turned out to be pretty ineffective. Meanwhile, his mother, Empress Lao, took the reins as regent. After Emperor Hui passed away early, she kept control through child emperors and worked hard to eliminate any potential threats from Gaozu's other consorts. This 16-year period, known as the Ala Clan Regency, was marked by aggressive centralization efforts and her attempts to set up her family as the next dynasty. It wasn't until her death that the Liu imperial clan managed to regain control, getting rid of Liu family members and restoring Gaozu's lineage. This whole episode set the stage for female regency power and highlighted the risks of consort family dominance, which would pop up again in imperial history. Then came the reign of Emperor Wen, which marked a key moment of consolidation after those early challenges. He took the throne after Empress Liu's death and the political shakeup that followed. His focus was on stability, economic growth, and moderate governance. He ran a frugal administration, cutting down on lavish spending while building financial reserves for future emergencies. Tax cuts helped jumpstart agricultural recovery and boost commercial growth. Even the criminal punishments were toned down, to the point where executioner swords were said to be gathering dust during his 23 years in power. The resulting prosperity and stability laid the groundwork for future expansion under his more ambitious son. Speaking of which, Emperor Wu, who ruled for an impressive 54 years, from 141 to 87 BC, took the Han from a regional power to a full-blown empire. He achieved this through military expansion, administrative reforms, economic innovation, and cultural development. His bold policies built on the solid foundation laid by previous rulers while significantly extending imperial influence across Eastern Asia. The political, economic, and cultural patterns established during his reign would shape imperial governance for centuries, earning him recognition as the pinnacle of Western Han achievement and setting the stage for future dynastic golden ages. Under Emperor Wu, military expansion fundamentally changed the empire's relationship with its neighbors. He ditched the defensive Hekin policy towards the Xiongnu and launched major offensive campaigns deep into their territory. Generals Wei Qing and Huo Kubing led massive armies, backed by sophisticated logistics that supported operations far beyond settled agricultural areas. These campaigns dealt significant blows to the Xiongnu, capturing key territories like the strategically important Hexi Corridor and establishing commanderies in previously nomadic regions. While they didn't completely wipe out the Xiongnu threat, these efforts greatly diminished their power and showcased the empire's military might, stretching well beyond traditional boundaries. Territorial expansion continued in all directions under Emperor Wu's leadership. Campaigns into Korea established 4 commanderies in its northern regions. Expeditions into the southwest brought non-Chinese peoples into the imperial fold. Most importantly, military operations into Central Asia secured trade routes that would later be known as the Silk Road, establishing tributary relationships with distant states. This expansionist agenda effectively doubled the empire's territory compared to the early Han borders, incorporating diverse populations and resources while creating buffer zones to protect core agricultural regions from external threats. This military expansion called for some smart administrative changes to effectively manage the newly added territories. Emperor Wu jumped right in, rolling out centralization measures that cut down on aristocratic power and beefed up bureaucratic control. The leftover vassal kingdoms were either reduced or eliminated, replaced by commanderies that were directly managed. Local governance increasingly fell into the hands of officials appointed by the central authority, who were rotated regularly to keep any one person from building too much power. Censorial systems were put in place to keep an eye on official conduct through regular inspections and performance reviews. All these measures worked together to boost imperial authority while trimming down the intermediate powers that could challenge the throne. Emperor Wu's economic policies mirrored this centralization, aiming to strengthen control while also raking in revenue for ambitious projects. The government set up monopolies on essential goods like salt, iron, alcoholic beverages, and coinage, which brought in significant income while allowing them to regulate these key commodities. Standardized coinage made trade smoother across the expanded territories. They also established agricultural colonies in frontier areas, which not only ramped up food production, but also settled military veterans in strategic spots. Taxation got a makeover, with better registration systems to track population and land holdings, though this created a hefty administrative workload. These changes dramatically boosted the state's ability to gather resources for imperial initiatives. One of the biggest shifts during this time was Emperor Wu's push to make Confucianism the official state ideology. He took steps that would have a lasting impact on future dynasties. The Imperial University saw huge growth, offering standardized education focused on classical texts for future officials. Although the civil service exam system was still in its early days, it kicked off a merit-based selection process for government positions. Official support for compiling and commenting on classical texts established authoritative interpretations of these works. Collectively, these initiatives elevated Confucianism from just one philosophical tradition among many to the backbone of state ideology, shaping governance practices and educational standards for years to come. Culturally, this period was just as significant as the political expansion. The historian Sima Qian compiled the monumental records of the Grand Historian, which set the standard for future historical writing while documenting the early imperial era. Literary innovation thrived, with poets like Sima Xiangru creating new forms that pushed traditional boundaries. Advances in technology were seen across various fields, including math, astronomy, and engineering. This cultural boom established the Western Han Dynasty as a classic reference point for later dynasties looking to legitimize themselves through cultural achievements that matched their military and economic successes. However, this remarkable expansion also led to contradictions that would eventually undermine the Western Han system. Military campaigns and infrastructure projects, while extending imperial reach, created massive financial burdens that led to rising taxes. The bureaucratic growth needed to manage these expanded territories became a drain, competing with productive economic activities. Wealth started to concentrate, even with periodic reforms, creating social divides and weakening the agrarian base that supported imperial operations. These structural tensions, which were manageable under strong leadership, would contribute to the dynasty's decline when paired with leadership failures and external challenges. The Han system faced a serious test when Wang Mang, a member of the consort family serving as regent for a child emperor, seized the throne and declared the Xia Dynasty early in the 1st century A.D. A 16-year reign was both a radical innovation and an attempt at restoration. He justified his takeover with claims that heaven's mandate had shifted, and he pushed through sweeping reforms aimed at tackling the social problems that had built up in the late Western Han. He nationalized land ownership, abolished private slavery, reformed currency, adjusted tax structures, and reorganized administrative divisions. While these radical measures aimed to address real social issues, they met fierce resistance from established interests and faced implementation challenges. The resulting instability, worsened by natural disasters like flooding of the Yellow River, led to widespread rebellion and ultimately Wang Mang's downfall, paving the way for the restoration of Han rule under the Liu family. This restored Eastern Han would maintain the imperial system for another 2 centuries, building on the foundations laid during the Western period while adapting to new circumstances. The brief interregnum of Wang Mang highlighted both the resilience of the imperial structure established by Gaozu and its ability to regenerate even after revolutionary upheaval. This cycle establishment, expansion, crisis, restoration would become a pattern in imperial history, recurring through many dynastic transitions in the centuries to come. The restoration of Han rule after Wang Mang's usurpation showcased remarkable institutional resilience while marking a new phase in imperial development. Laozi, a distant relative of the Western Han imperial line, emerged victorious from the chaos and power struggles that followed widespread rebellion and social unrest. Upon taking the throne as Guangwu, he carefully reconsolidated imperial authority through military campaigns against regional warlords, remnants of the Qin forces, and various rebel groups. This process unfolded over a decade after his initial proclamation as emperor, successfully re-establishing central governance over territories that had splintered during the tumultuous final years of Wang Mang's rule. Unlike the founder of the Western Han, who set up a brand new system, Guangwu took a different route. He focused on restoring tried and true governance structures while making smart reforms to tackle clear weaknesses. The capital moved to Luoyang in the east, which was a strategic shift after facing tough times with natural disasters and rebellions that had put the previous capital, Chang'an, in jeopardy. Administrative divisions got a makeover, putting more focus on directly governed commanderies instead of semi-autonomous kingdoms. They also revamped the recruitment system for officials, stressing the importance of moral character and proven administrative skills over just military success or noble birth. This restoration didn't happen overnight. It took nearly 2 decades to fully stabilize. The frontier regions were particularly stubborn about rejoining, with non-Chinese groups in the south and west holding on to their independence for a long time. Fragments of the Zhongnu Confederation along the northern borders swung between paying tribute and outright hostility, depending on the situation and leadership. Naval expeditions helped reassert imperial authority over coastal areas where pirates had taken control. This gradual consolidation highlighted both the strengths and weaknesses of imperial governance. While it could restore order across vast territories, it needed a lot of time and resources to regain effective control after major disruptions. Once things settled down, the Eastern Han kept the core institutional framework from the Western period, but made important tweaks to adapt to the changing times. The recruitment system for imperial officials saw significant changes, with a growing focus on formal recommendation pathways that looked for candidates with good moral standing and educational backgrounds. The imperial university expanded massively, eventually accommodating thousands of students gearing up for government roles through a classical education. Local academies sprang up in provincial centers, making standardized education more accessible beyond just the capital. These changes boosted the meritocratic elements in the bureaucracy, while increasing the influence of Confucian ideals in governance. Civil administration began to take precedence over military leadership, flipping the priorities from the dynasty's early days. Professional administrators with a classical education and family ties to government service gradually took over senior positions, pushing military commanders aside. Meanwhile, palace eunuchs gained power by being close to imperial decision-makers, creating an alternative power center that competed with the regular bureaucracy. Provincial governorships, which were once mostly military roles, shifted to civil positions focused on tax collection, judicial processes, and infrastructure upkeep. This civilianization process made administration more consistent, but could also weaken the ability to respond quickly in crises that needed strong military leadership. Economic changes brought both chances and challenges for imperial governance. Agricultural production boomed thanks to better irrigation, new crop varieties, and the colonization of previously underused lands. Population growth skyrocketed, with census records showing around 60 million subjects by mid-dynasty, compared to about 20 million during the early Western Han. Commercial networks spread across the empire and beyond, with specialized markets, standardized contracts, and advanced financial tools making long-distance trade easier. Manufacturing also got a boost, with production centers focusing on everything from ceramics to textiles and metalwork to lacquer. These developments created significant wealth to support imperial operations, but they also made the systems more complex and potentially vulnerable to disruptions. Land distribution patterns saw some big changes during this time. The early Han focus on smallholder farms that supported independent farmers slowly faded away, even with some reform efforts popping up now and then. Economic pressures, a growing population, and political favoritism led to more land being concentrated in the hands of wealthy families, many of whom had ties to the imperial court. These big estates relied on tenant farmers and agricultural laborers instead of independent smallholders, which changed the social dynamics in rural areas and might have even hurt agricultural productivity because of absentee management. Powerful landowners found ways to dodge taxes, shifting the financial burden onto the remaining independent farmers. This created a cycle of debt and land abandonment, speeding up the trend of consolidation. When it came to external relations, the Eastern Han showed a mix of continuity and adaptation compared to what came before. The northern frontier underwent a major shift when the once unified Xiongnu Confederation broke apart into rival groups due to internal leadership struggles. One faction, known in Chinese sources as the Southern Xiongnu, decided to settle within imperial territories under a tributary arrangement. This setup offered some buffer protection against the remaining northern Xiongnu, while bringing significant nomadic populations into the frontier regions. Similarly, The Eastern Han took a practical approach to dealing with other peripheral peoples, using tribute systems, trade agreements, and occasional military expeditions to keep the frontier stable, even when conflicts arose. One of the biggest developments on the external front was the expansion of diplomatic and commercial ties with far-off regions. The famous Zhang-Qian expeditions during the Western Han had laid the groundwork for connections with Central Asian states. Eastern Han rulers took this a step further, establishing regular diplomatic exchanges and trade relationships that stretched all the way across Central Asia to the Parthian Empire, and even into the eastern provinces of the Roman world. Buddhist teachings made their way into imperial territories through these transcontinental connections, initially forming small communities of mainly non-Chinese followers in trading hubs and gradually influencing local populations. These foreign interactions brought in new crops, technologies, artistic styles, and intellectual ideas that slowly transformed imperial culture. Even with a strong emphasis on traditional values, the Eastern Han saw a surge in scientific and technological progress, building on earlier foundations. Astronomical observations became more advanced, with detailed records of celestial events supporting calendar development and astrological interpretations that were crucial for imperial decision-making. Mathematical knowledge expanded beyond just practical uses, diving into theoretical explorations of numbers and geometry. Medical understanding improved through careful observation and the compilation of texts, with various theories explaining diseases and treatment options. Engineering also saw significant advancements, including sophisticated water management systems, better metallurgical techniques, and structural innovations that allowed for larger architectural designs and more efficient building methods. Among the many technological innovations of this period, the invention of paper stands out for its game-changing implications. Traditional accounts credit Cai Lun with its invention during Emperor He's reign, while archaeological evidence suggests earlier developments. This new technology, made from processed plant fibers into thin sheets, drastically cut down the cost of producing written materials compared to earlier methods like bamboo strips, wooden tablets, or silk. This information revolution made it easier to keep administrative records, expand education, and boost literary production, all while improving the transmission of knowledge across time and space. Although its full impact would unfold over the following centuries, paper technology ranks among the most significant innovations in world history for how it transformed information management and cultural sharing. Culturally, the Eastern Han experienced a creative tension between honoring classical traditions and embracing innovative adaptations. Scholars increasingly focused on interpreting classic texts through commentaries, making ancient works more accessible to modern audiences. This led to a rich body of exegetical literature that balanced respect for the original texts with practical applications. Artistic production mirrored this balance, combining traditional themes with technical innovations and occasional foreign influences. Literary forms evolved within established frameworks, with historical writing, philosophical discussions, and poetry, all showcasing both continuity and development. This pattern of innovation within tradition, rather than outright rejection, defined imperial civilization throughout its later history. During this time, intellectual life really blossomed across various traditions. Confucianism grew stronger, linking itself with the imperial administration and education systems. However, this also led to some internal splits, giving rise to different schools of thought that interpreted classical texts in unique ways. Taoism shifted from being mainly a philosophical idea to a more organized religion, adding meditation, special diets, alchemical experiments, and rituals into the mix. Plus, Buddhism came onto the scene, offering new perspectives that challenged Confucian ethics and Taoist beliefs, while providing fresh paths for spiritual growth. All these ideas coexisted in a pretty open environment, even with Confucianism being the main player. Despite these achievements, structural weaknesses gradually chipped away at Eastern Han stability during its 2nd century. Conflicts among factions in the imperial court increasingly paralyzed effective governance, with competing groups forming around consort families, unique officials, and Confucian scholars, all caught up in destructive power struggles. Meanwhile, regional governors gained more independence from central authority, responding to local conditions and building their own power bases. Economic disparities grew wider, with wealthy landowners connected to court politics thriving while impoverished agricultural producers faced heavy tax burdens. This internal strife created dysfunction that left the system increasingly exposed to external shocks. The crisis hit hard with the Yellow Turban Rebellion during Emperor Ling's reign in the late 2nd century. This massive peasant uprising was fueled by Taoist teachings, promising cosmic renewal through the overthrow of corrupt authorities. Led by faith healer Zhang Zhao, the movement drew in hundreds of thousands of followers, organized into quasi-military units recognized by their yellow head coverings. Although the rebellion was eventually suppressed through significant military mobilization, it fundamentally changed the power dynamics by requiring the delegation of emergency authority to regional commanders, who then maintained their own independent forces. This militarization of provincial governance set the stage for warlord dynamics that would overshadow imperial authority, even after the rebellion was quelled. The emergency response sped up the institutional breakdown already in motion due to factional conflicts. Court eunuchs, who controlled access to successive child emperors, engaged in bloody purges of Confucian officials they viewed as threats to their influence. The notorious partisan prohibitions led to the execution or exile of thousands of scholars and officials, wiping out institutional memory and creating martyr figures celebrated by future generations. Provincial administrators, facing local crises, increasingly acted on their own when central guidance proved contradictory or unrealistic. Agricultural disruptions from warfare, excessive taxation, and natural disasters triggered mass population movements, undermining census records and tax collection systems. These compounding issues overwhelmed the system's ability to adapt, leading to systemic failure rather than just transitional difficulties. The final collapse unfolded as military commanders, originally empowered to handle specific crises, began usurping imperial prerogatives. Dong Zhuo, a frontier general with substantial forces, seized the capital and installed puppet emperors under his control, only to be assassinated for his brutality. His removal created a power vacuum filled through complex maneuvering among various regional commanders, controlling different territories and resources. Cao Cao emerged as the most dominant contender through superior strategic vision, administrative skills, and political manipulation, all while maintaining nominal Han imperial structures with puppet emperors. He effectively established independent authority, which was later formalized when his son proclaimed the Wei Dynasty after his death. The famous Battle of Red Cliffs marked a crucial turning point in this transition. Cao Cao, having consolidated control over northern territories through military campaigns against rival warlords, attempted a southern conquest with a massive force moving down the Yangtze River an alliance between southern commanders. Liu Bei and Sun Quan achieved an unexpected victory against these numerically superior forces, establishing the tripartite division that would define the subsequent Three Kingdoms period. This new setup, Cao Wei in the north, Shu Han in the southwest, and Wu in the southeast, replaced Han unity with regional states claiming imperial legitimacy while engaging in ongoing conflict, punctuated by temporary alliances and diplomatic maneuvering. The formal end of the Han Dynasty came when Cao Pai, after his father's death, forced the last Han emperor to abdicate and proclaimed himself the founder of the Wei Dynasty. While this transition represented significant political change, it also maintained substantial continuity in administrative structures, legal frameworks, and cultural patterns established during 4 centuries of Han governance. Unlike the catastrophic collapse of the Zhou dynasty, which led to prolonged warfare before the Qin unification, the Han transition, though disruptive, preserved significant governmental capacity that would be utilized by competing successor states. This patterned political fragmentation without complete institutional collapse marked an important evolution in imperial cycles compared to earlier precedents. Several factors contributed to the decline of the Han dynasty, despite its remarkable institutional sophistication and cultural achievements. The unavoidable tension between centralized administration and local autonomy across vast territories created persistent structural challenges that needed constant attention and adaptation. Imperial families showed a biological tendency toward declining competence across generations, with the vigor of the founders gradually replaced by palace-raised successors lacking direct administrative or military experience. Economic stratification worsened despite periodic reform efforts, undermining the agricultural base that supported imperial operations and creating parallel power structures that competed with official hierarchies. External pressures from nomadic peoples required ongoing resource allocation for frontier defense, diverting capabilities from internal development and governance improvement. Perhaps most significantly, the Eastern Han experienced a decline in leadership quality during crucial periods when an adaptive response could have addressed emerging problems before they escalated into catastrophic issues. The succession of child emperors during the latter dynasty created power vacuums filled by consort families, court eunuchs, and eventually military strongmen, rather than experienced administrators capable of implementing necessary reforms. Factional conflicts drained energy that could have been better directed towards substantive governance challenges, resulting in institutional paralysis at precisely the moment when flexibility and innovation were most needed. This systemic failure reflected not an inevitable decline, but rather specific historical circumstances that hindered effective adaptation to changing conditions. Despite its political dissolution, the Han legacy endured, establishing patterns that would influence East Asian civilization for 2 millennia. The imperial governmental system, which combined bureaucratic administration with monarchical authority, provided a template for all subsequent dynastic formations. Intellectual frameworks that blended Confucian ethics, legalist techniques, and Taoist perspectives created sophisticated governance theories adaptable to changing circumstances while maintaining fundamental continuity. Economic organizations that integrated agricultural production, commercial exchange, and manufacturing specialization established resilient patterns even amid political disruption. Cultural achievements in literature, historiography, philosophy, science, and technology laid the groundwork for future development across various fields. The influence of the Han Dynasty was so profound that later restoration movements consistently invoked its precedent as a legitimizing model, with multiple subsequent dynasties explicitly styling themselves as Han restorations. The term Han evolved from a dynastic designation to an ethnic and cultural identifier, eventually becoming the predominant self-designation of the Chinese people. This remarkable transformation from a political institution to a civilizational identity illustrates how the Han Dynasty's achievements transcended mere governmental structures, establishing enduring cultural patterns that remained resilient through centuries of political reconfiguration, foreign invasion, and social transformation. The collapse of Han imperial unity marked the end of ancient China's formative period, but it also set the stage for patterns that would shape the region's history for the next 2 millennia. Even with the political fragmentation that followed the fall of the Han, the core frameworks established during those early centuries showed incredible resilience through cycles of unity and division, local rule and foreign takeover, as well as growth and decline. The systems of government, intellectual traditions, economic structures, and cultural achievements developed during this time laid the groundwork for one of the most continuous civilizations in world history, maintaining a clear sense of identity despite significant changes over the ages. The political structure that evolved through various innovations from the warring states period to the Han Dynasty stands out as perhaps the most important legacy of this time. Unlike in Europe, where the fall of the Roman Empire led to completely different political systems, the Chinese imperial system consistently reappeared after periods of division. Each reunification actively referenced previous dynasties while making necessary adjustments to fit the current situation. This cycle division, followed by reunion under modified imperial structures, defined the history from the Han collapse up to the early 20th century, showcasing an extraordinary resilience that lasted nearly 2,000 years. Several key aspects of this imperial framework are worth highlighting for their lasting impact. The idea of unified sovereignty under a single ruler claiming universal authority provided the ideological backbone for political legitimacy throughout history. Even during long stretches of division, rival states often claimed imperial status instead of accepting permanent fragmentation as a valid arrangement. This drive for unification was a constant theme, with periods of division seen as temporary setbacks rather than acceptable alternatives to imperial unity. The remarkable endurance of this unification ideal over centuries of actual division is one of the most distinctive features of Chinese political history. The bureaucratic administrative system that emerged during this time also showed impressive longevity. The Qing dynasty's shift from aristocratic governance to a merit-based bureaucracy, later refined by the Han to include Confucian ethical elements, set a standard for all future imperial systems. Professional administrators, chosen through various merit-based methods instead of just through family connections, became the norm. Although the specific ways of selecting these officials changed significantly over time, this continuity in bureaucracy helped the government recover after political upheavals and maintained its capacity through transitions between dynasties that might have otherwise led to total collapse. The concept of the dynastic cycle that developed from these early experiences offered a sophisticated way to understand political change while maintaining a sense of continuity. The Mandate of Heaven doctrine, first articulated during the early Zhou period and expanded upon by later thinkers, created a pattern where virtuous founders established dynasties that eventually declined due to moral failings. When this happened, Heaven would transfer its mandate to new rulers who demonstrated greater virtue. This framework not only legitimized the current authority, but also provided a theoretical basis for rebellion against corrupt rulers, creating a stable system that allowed for political change without undermining the core legitimacy of imperial governance. The resulting pattern establishment, expansion, decline, replacement served as a lens for interpreting political history for centuries to come. The balance between practical legalism and ethical Confucianism that characterized mature imperial governance is another lasting legacy. The Han synthesis, which blended legalist administrative methods with Confucian ethics, created a highly adaptable model of governance that combined effective management with moral legitimacy. Subsequent dynasties maintained this balance, although the specific focus shifted depending on the circumstances and leadership styles of the time. This blend allowed imperial governance to stay effective while also retaining moral authority, providing flexibility and continuity across various historical contexts. Economic innovations during this formative period also set patterns that demonstrated remarkable durability. Agricultural systems that balanced intensive farming techniques with land reclamation provided a sustainable base for supporting large populations, even amid disruptions. Water management systems, including flood control, irrigation networks, and transportation canals, transformed natural waterways into productive infrastructure that supported both farming and trade. Specialized manufacturing hubs produced everything from everyday essentials to luxury goods, creating complex economic networks that extended throughout the empire and beyond. These economic patterns proved resilient, often continuing to function even during political turmoil. Technological advancements from this period had far-reaching effects that went beyond their immediate context. The invention of paper revolutionized how information was managed, significantly lowering the costs of producing texts and allowing for better record-keeping, broader access to education, and increased literary output. Advances in ironworking improved agricultural tools and military equipment, laying a technological foundation for future growth across various fields. Civil engineering projects, such as road networks, bridges, and urban water systems, established infrastructure patterns that would define imperial territories for millennia. These technological innovations, while later refined, showcased remarkable durability in their basic principles. Intellectual traditions that emerged during this time laid the groundwork for how people would think across various fields in the future. Confucianism, for example, set up ethical guidelines that shaped social relationships, political duties, and educational focuses. Its influence stretched far beyond just philosophical discussions. On the flip side, Taoism offered fresh perspectives, highlighting natural processes, spontaneous growth, and the limits of human control, which balanced out the more activist Confucian ideas. Meanwhile, legalism brought practical governance strategies and organized administration methods, even though its harsher elements were officially dismissed. All these schools of thought that popped up during the Hundred Schools period combined to create rich intellectual resources that supported cultural development through changing historical times. Another significant legacy from this period is the historical awareness that took shape. The careful collection of historical records began with the Confucian Spring and Autumn Annals and reached a sophisticated level in Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian. This established historiographical traditions that were unmatched in other civilizations of the time. These historical records, kept alive by specialized historical offices through various dynasties, created an incredible continuity in institutional memory, even during political changes. This historical awareness not only provided practical resources for governance through the analysis of precedents, but also ensured cultural continuity by fostering a shared understanding of history across different eras. The standardization of language and the development of literature during this time built cultural foundations that went well beyond immediate political issues. The Qing Dynasty unified writing systems, which, although later modified, created a common way of communicating across different linguistic regions. This made it easier to coordinate administration and share culture, despite the significant differences in spoken languages. Literary forms that developed during the Han Dynasty set patterns for future works, covering everything from philosophical discussions to poetry, historical accounts to fictional stories. These language and literary frameworks ensured cultural continuity, allowing civilization to stay coherent even through periods of fragmentation that could have led to permanent cultural divides. Scientific and mathematical knowledge blossomed during this formative period, laying the groundwork for future intellectual traditions. The astronomical observation systems developed during the Western Han Dynasty reached a high level of sophistication in the Eastern Han's mathematical astronomy. This established practices and theoretical frameworks that would influence future traditions for centuries. The understanding of mathematics expanded beyond just practical uses into theoretical concepts, providing intellectual resources that benefited various fields like engineering and economics. Medical knowledge, which combined empirical observation with theoretical organization, established healthcare practices that would evolve while keeping a fundamental conceptual continuity. These scientific traditions, while developing differently from their Western counterparts, showcased a deep understanding of natural phenomena within unique frameworks. The religious landscape also transformed during this period, establishing patterns that would define spiritual development in East Asian civilization. State-sponsored rituals rooted in ancient traditions created a framework for public religious practices linked to political authority. Family-centered ancestral veneration established religious continuity at the household level, allowing traditions to survive political upheaval or changes in doctrine. A variety of beliefs about supernatural beings, cosmic forces, and afterlife possibilities coexisted in a relatively tolerant atmosphere, allowing for multiple religious expressions. The arrival of Buddhism during the Eastern Han Dynasty, although initially on the sidelines, began to reshape the religious scene while adapting to existing cultural norms. This blend of official cults with family practices and philosophical depth with popular devotion created a unique spiritual environment that characterized future development. Social organization patterns established during this time also proved to be long-lasting, even as they evolved through historical changes. Family structures that emphasized patrilineal descent, hierarchical relationships, and multi-generational ties provided social stability that weathered political turmoil. Local community organizations struck a balance between government administration and self-regulation, forming a resilient social infrastructure that adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining basic functions. Status distinctions shifted from rigid aristocratic models to more fluid arrangements based on a mix of birth, wealth, education, and official roles, creating pathways for social mobility within a hierarchical system. Although these social patterns underwent changes due to internal developments and outside influences, they maintained a recognizable continuity across different historical contexts. Diplomatic frameworks and patterns of foreign relations that were established during this period also played a significant role in shaping future developments beyond their immediate historical context. The tributary system, which defined external relationships through ritual submission, trade privileges, and cultural exchanges, offered a flexible framework that accommodated various interactions, from genuine subordination to mere symbolic acknowledgement. Strategies for managing borders, which balanced military defense, diplomatic engagement, and cultural interaction, laid the groundwork for how future dynasties would handle relations with nomadic peoples, adapting as necessary. These diplomatic frameworks, while evolving with changing power dynamics and cultural interactions, maintained a conceptual continuity that helped interpret external relationships throughout imperial history. The geographic extent of cultural influence established during this formative period created patterns that would characterize subsequent East Asian civilization. Core territories, directly administered through imperial bureaucracy, established regions where cultural integration reached its greatest depth. Peripheral regions with significant non-Chinese populations experienced varying degrees of cultural influence while maintaining distinctive identities. Beyond imperial boundaries, surrounding states including Korean kingdoms, Japanese archipelago polities, and Vietnamese territories selectively adopted aspects of this cultural complex while maintaining indigenous traditions. The resulting cultural sphere transcended political boundaries while acknowledging significant variation, creating a distinctive civilizational zone characterized by shared elements including literary Chinese, Confucian social ethics, bureaucratic governance models, and agricultural techniques adapted to local conditions. These diverse legacies came together to create a civilizational framework that shows incredible continuity over thousands of years, even with all the changes brought about by internal evolution and outside influences. The bureaucratic empire, which started with Qin innovations and was shaped further by the Han, kept coming back after each period of fragmentation, especially during the Sui and Tang dynasties. After almost 4 centuries of division, the blend of Confucianism and legalism would assert itself again as a key governance framework, reaching a peak during the Song dynasty. Even when faced with significant changes under the Mongol and Manchu conquests, the core institutional patterns, economic systems, technological advancements, and social structures from this early period remained intact. But just because we see this continuity doesn't mean there wasn't any growth or development. Each time the dynasties reunited after a period of division, they brought in fresh ideas that emerged during those fragmented times. Every dynasty introduced unique policies to tackle the challenges of their day while still drawing from historical examples. Technological progress happened gradually, focusing on improvements rather than radical shifts. Cultural expressions evolved through creative interactions with established traditions instead of completely rejecting them. This all resulted in a pattern of development that balanced tradition with innovation over a remarkably long period. Fast forward to the modern era, starting in the 19th century and picking up speed in the 20th, we see a huge shift compared to earlier transitions, which had kept a lot of fundamental institutional and cultural continuity, even with some changes. The sweeping rejection of imperial governance, Confucian values, and traditional cultural expressions during the modernization efforts of the 20th century created a break more profound than any earlier historical transition. Yet, even with these radical changes, we can still see the influence of the patterns laid down in the formative period. Today's governance structures, while ideologically different from their imperial predecessors, still rely on a centralized bureaucratic system that traces back to the innovations of the Qin and Han. Social relationships, although dramatically altered by revolutionary changes, still reflect the distinctive patterns established during those early developments. The remarkable longevity of these foundational patterns raises important questions about how institutions can endure, how culture can stay consistent, and how civilizations can develop over time. One interesting explanation for this continuity points to the unique geographical conditions that shaped historical development. The North China Plain, relatively isolated by mountains, deserts, and oceans, provided a natural setting for political unity. In contrast to the more fragmented geography of Europe, extensive river systems made transportation and communication easier, which was crucial for integrating administration across vast areas. The agricultural productivity of this region supported large populations, which in turn provided tax revenue to sustain government operations and military manpower to maintain control over territories. These geographical advantages helped the empire re-establish itself after periods of fragmentation, creating a pattern of division followed by reunification under modified frameworks that still kept the essence of earlier models. Another angle to consider is the ideological factors that helped maintain a sense of unity even during political upheaval. The comprehensive Confucian ethical system provided a guiding framework that influenced social interactions. Political expectations and educational priorities transcending specific government structures. The rich historical awareness fostered through careful record-keeping created a shared understanding of past events, which shaped what people expected in the present. A literary tradition that used a standardized written language allowed communication across different linguistic regions while providing common cultural references. These ideological elements helped maintain a sense of coherence through political fragmentation that could have led to lasting cultural divides, making it easier for subsequent reunifications to draw on historical precedents. The ancient foundations we've explored in this historical overview continue to influence modern developments, even in light of the significant changes brought about by modern transformation. The institutional patterns, intellectual frameworks, social organizations, and cultural expressions that were established during those formative times continue to shape contemporary experiences, both directly and in reaction to changes. Understanding these ancient patterns is crucial for grasping the historical development over 2 millennia, while also shedding light on the unique features of today's society that still echo influences from those early experiences. This incredible blend of continuity and change, tradition and adaptation, is what defines the extraordinary civilizational achievement that has emerged from the historical developments we've examined.